slide him in.
Maurice is sitting?
Yeah, he is. He's going to sit there now.
Eric.
Yeah. Well,
He can sit next to Chris.
yeah. Maybe just slide down. I'll ask
If I can get the chair down.
No, no, it's not happening now. We can wait.
Okay.
We can wait. Yeah. We fine.
Yeah, right.
Just to go.
Yeah.
Are we live?
We are
Or recording?
actually live for the first time too. We now stream to YouTube as one of the recording methods, so,
Oh, okay, cool.
and it gives
Great.
us a good backup, so.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay. Maurice, she said he's up and he's coming up. Maurice. Oh, wait, let's just wait a minute for Maurice to walk in.
He's like a full professor, you give him an extra few minutes.
What was the rule in college school? If the
6
professor
minutes.
was there?
6
6
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah, we used to do
I
6
remember
minutes.
something like 30 minutes.
Really?
No show.
No, we
and
did
were all
6
waiting.
minutes.
It was only the philosophy
Because the
professor.
full professors get more time, which I always thought was stupid.
Like the philosophy professor, he walked around and gave us the answers to the questions. He walked by, looked at your paper, he goes, no, that's not right.
I like that kind of professor. I never had any like that.
Well, we'll start now. If Maurice is going, we'll take a minute anyways. I'd just like to call to order the MAG-ARP meeting for Monday, February 11th. Yes, February 11th, 2019. First thing on the agenda is approval of the minutes from January 22nd. Last week, Shannon sent those minutes off to everybody.
Yep.
You know, this time, is there any edits, any comments, corrections to be made to the minutes?
My name, that's all. Alfredia. It's just a spelling.
No, that's a good pickup on that one.
Yeah, but I'll add it to my 25 other forms of my name. It's really interesting.
We'll correct that.
I don't have a problem with it, but
No,
Also believe, if I can make a comment, that the motion that I made was carried, not defeated. I received an email that someone had reviewed the
5
minutes.
approved, 3 opposed on the backside.
Second page?
Okay, that's fine. I didn't know that we went to
This
the
is
back.
this is
Yep.
just to review, okay?
there's no correction at all.
Okay.
The 20% income rule was not, if that's what you're referring to.
On the front page, Kathy?
That's what I was referring to.
So,
No, that
But-
was not approved.
Okay, now I'm seeing the backside. I did not see
Because
that.
this is, right, to go back and review the information that was sent, that was approved. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
second.
A motion by Mr. Carrier, second by Mrs. Fournier, Councilor Fournier. All those approve? Object? Abstain? 1, 2 abstain? Okay, so by a vote of 6-2, 6-0-2, minutes are accepted. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So review final draft ordinances, and I'm sorry, there's a typo. When I said excluding section 60-2, it was meant to be including. We wanted to, we previously have talked about a lot of the definitions that came from the state with regards to certain technicalities that we were going to defer out to planning board to look at after further state Department of Agricultural consideration as well. So we're going to go through everything, but let me tell you about the process too. So at this point, we'd like to go through and look for edits, look for typos. I actually went through it this evening with Councilor Lasagna, and we found something that made absolutely no sense. So that's something that we have to talk about. Okay, so a mismanagement of words, if you would. So we'd like to go through this literally paragraph by paragraph, looking for any edits, looking and considering any clarification points that might need to be made, and then just taking your time and going through that. Okay, so from here, just to fully explain the process, excuse me, after we're done our work here tonight, okay, this needs to go to the planning board. The planning board is going to continue to work on this ordinance. They're going to solicit public comments, public feedback. Simultaneously, we'll go to the State of Maine Department of Agriculture. The State Department of Agriculture will, and and I don't believe, and I checked, we could not find an ordinance recommending that this goes to the State Forestry Division, or the appropriate name, whatever that is, I can't remember off the top of my head. There's no like type of ruling. This is an actual state law that states that any changes to ag land ordinances have to go to the state of Maine for review. They have up to 90 days to make their recommendations and to review any proposed ordinances. We don't necessarily think it will take 90 days because they have already reviewed the vast majority of this language that dates back to 1964. But at the same time, the planning board is doing their review and soliciting public comments. The state will as well, okay? We'll submit it to the state it's not Department of Forestry, help me out.
Agriculture.
That governs forestry, the Forestry Division.
Agriculture,
still under ag?
conservation, and forestry.
But it doesn't have to go to, it just goes to that and they look at forestry as well? I thought there was a difference.
I'm not sure if they look at it with an eye towards forestry or not. We
Let's
could
just
ask
double
them.
check that, because I couldn't find anything, and maybe I was looking in the wrong spot. Okay, because we want to make sure the forestry aspect is covered.
I might be able to clear that up a little bit. Stephanie Gilbert's is farming and agriculture, that part of the process. And they need a plan to evaluate. They don't help you make a plan. They will, but that evaluation process is only after you have a plan, then they get it and approve it.
And that's what we're talking about here.
Right.
We're talking about submitting this to Ms. Gilbert. But I didn't know if there is a corresponding department that would look at any type of forestry-related ordinance changes, or any ordinance change that could affect forestry as an industry.
I don't think so.
Well, Stephanie is natural resources and not solely ag, so that I think her phase of the natural resource department covers basically all aspects.
Including, okay. Well, we'll verify that, but thank you. Hopefully, if that's the case, it makes it much easier. The planning board will then, after this has been assigned to the planning board will do what the planning board does. It will then go to city council with recommendations from the planning board. It will then have its public hearings and subsequent 2 votes by the city council before it's enacted, if it is enacted, okay? So just give everybody kind of an overview of the process. So we're still in the beginning phases of everything.
Question. I guess that's what my point was, is if there are other plans, then Stephanie Gilbert's outfit shouldn't be working on only one.
There's only one plan, and that's this plan. So this is the one that they're going to this is the one that they're going to review.
Have we approved this plan?
We voted on this plan, okay, once already. There has been no fundamental changes to the plan, the ordinances since that vote, but this, how can I explain this again? It's a job of this group, this working group, to work on ordinances to present for consideration by the planning board and the city council, who will be the end-all as a city council adjudicator and whether or not this plan is accepted as ordinance. Okay, so
Is it 20%?
Jason, I believe this has to go to council before it gets to the planning board. Somebody has to present this to the planning board. You people can't present it to the planning board.
I'm sorry, and I can't take questions at the time for the audience, but I will hear.
It's not a question. I'm telling you the truth.
Okay. On the-
You cannot bring it to the planning board. It has to go to council first.
It's already on the schedule for the February 25th council meeting.
But what you just said was it was going
No.
to the planning board, then the council. That's wrong.
February 20.
Two members of
Okay, enough. At this point, Mr. Herrick, please give me the respect to answer the question.
You have no respect for nobody, Jason.
Okay.
Two members of this council have
Mike,
to bring this to the planning board.
Make the call. Downstairs, please.
Tell me I'm wrong.
This is-
It has to go to council before it goes to planning board. But 2 members from the council have to bring it to planning board. Or somebody from the audience
So we're
has
gonna-
to bring it to the planning and permitting department before it goes to planning board.
I'm going to answer you here. Okay. After consultation with legal, city manager, the assistant city manager, there's an order that's going to go on the February 25th City Council meeting approving, okay, this ordinance to be referred to the planning board. It doesn't approve the ordinance, okay? There's no votes. It doesn't become law, okay? It simply states that the planning board will then start its process. This is an ordinance, protocol, and it's completely fine and legal, okay? The City Council endorses this committee, the city via resolution, with the plan that we're following. So, with that stated,
So are we voting on this week?
it's not on the agenda. So let's go through it. We're going to start with 60-2. Mr. Moore.
Can I interrupt just a second?
Sure.
So, we're going to go through and make changes or recommend changes, text changes in this. And then is the output of this group a memorandum or a letter or something that goes to the planning, to the city council?
We should have some sort of
I mean,
letter
will
or
there be
cover letter
something that
explaining.
provides a summary of what's happened over the last 3 months with this group so that the receiving party has a context to, you know, I mean, I realize that there have been various members of both the council and the planning board that have attended some, but maybe not all of these meetings, and may not have, you know, read the exact text of the things we're proposing, so.
We have that as point 4. Maybe we can discuss that in its entirety, because it's a good comment.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm
So
just
we're,
thinking, you know, the
So we are going to vote
deliverable.
next time or something?
we might not.
We might not?
We might not.
So what's the implication then, that we're approving this right now?
We're working on draft ordinance.
Draft.
We don't really approve anything. Council ends up approving it, okay?
So we're approving,
But we're recommending language, is what you're saying?
We're recommending language. We're recommending ordinance change. Right. Okay? Okay.
And we're not going to discuss any alternative options?
At this point, this far down the line, we've really hashed out what we all think, okay, based upon the initial vote that we had about approving the
There were a number of things
ordinance.
that we brought up during this, like soils, that I think we all agreed were something we should get in here. And I don't know if that's now or...
There's a couple ways. I mean, there's a lot of soils, right? And this really talks about how do we manage, I think, agriculture as a resource. This also talks about how the future agriculture advisory committee.
This is about the process that we're doing here. I mean, we're going to follow a process to go through these things and make changes, correct? And
We're
when we
looking for-
do that, one of the changes, we could amend or make changes to this document, correct? I mean, that's...
Substantive changes? I mean, I'm sorry.
saying, you know, I'm suggesting that, I don't see the soils portion in here at all, about soils of statewide importance, that they not be built on. And we had talked about that several meetings ago, and there was discussion about how it would get worked into the language, but I just don't see it here.
Okay.
So, I don't know if it was an omission, or we need to make a motion.
And there's been a lot of meetings. I don't think anything was disingenuous.
Yeah, can I address that?
Please.
I fully appreciate that as something that the ordinance ultimately achieves, but I think we've been dealing with mostly definitions of things within the ordinance that change not so much the allowable uses of the land. I don't think any allowable uses other than, you know, maybe including recreational uses, you know,
Well,
has been.
we've limited gun shooting, we can't have a rifle, pistol, or trap shooting range anymore. I think that was a change that you included initially when we sent this around.
That was.
So there's been a bunch of changes to the ordinance. My question is, if there are pieces that are hanging out there that we've discussed, when do they get incorporated?
Well, let's talk about them now. Let's
Okay.
go through it line by line.
Okay.
Mayor, just have a second. I
Please.
just want to clarify something. I know what your intent is, and that is to have an order on the agenda for the next council meeting on February 25th for the council to have any ordinance change go to the planning board. We talked about that. I just want to clarify that for everyone here. I'm not sure everyone understood that. So, okay?
We understood? Good. Okay. Thank you. So, let's go through it. Okay? Let's start with 60-2, definitions. Give you all a minute. We'll go through it if everybody's good, paragraph by paragraph. good on the first paragraph, accessory structure? Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll move along to the next paragraph, Agriculture Advisory Board. We did talk about making a committee, Agriculture Advisory Committee. It's somewhat semantics, okay?
It's named in the ordinance right now as the Agricultural Advisory Board.
It is.
So-
It is. Do we want to call it board, or?
I don't know. I would need somebody to explain to me the difference between the two.
Mike? Board, difference between board and committee.
This committee.
Definition-wise, there's not any difference.
I think it really depends what duties you assign to them. What they
sorry?
Really depends what duties you assign to them, what their role is, and you could assign the same duties to either a board or a committee.
So should we keep Agricultural Advisory Board as the consistent language, because that's what's in the ordinance right now?
I'm reading the definition.
Can we
of the
discuss
changes.
what the board is going to do, too? I mean, and what its scope is?
Yeah,
and
that's
stuff?
actually later on tonight.
Right.
That
I
in
think
here?
agenda number 5?
It's on the agenda,
But it's not in the language.
number 5.
No, we have to talk about it because it's encompassing a lot more in the Crossroads report. So we have to look at that as well. Stuff that you just aren't going to write an ordinance, i.e. supporting agriculture as an industry. So
But
there's
it's
a lot
going to
more in
have to
there.
be part of what we recommend to the city council, right? It's like a list of all the responsibilities and stuff.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Eric, there are a lot of committees, I know, when you're looking at the city structure. I think we have more committees than we have boards. I know we have the planning board. What would be the difference between a planning board and a planning committee?
You need
I
to
think-
speak up.
What would be the difference between a planning board and a planning committee, using the planning board as an example? I think if we're going to use a name, we want to make sure.
Board or commission, I
Board.
think, is more often a permanent body. I think
Right.
Committees are quite often temporary.
Committees, and that's what I
We can do a
think.
legal review just to
Right.
make sure that the charter doesn't prescribe boards or committees as different. But
Let's stick with board for right now, then we can do it later.
we should be consistent throughout the ordinance with
That's
whatever
why-
terminology.
And that's
you
why I
choose.
asked the question, so that we can think in terms of what its use is going to be.
And I think from what Chris said, that once we begin to sort of enumerate what the responsibilities are, that may dictate whether it's a committee or a board.
That can be part of that review. Yeah.
So, that's the third word. Let's just keep moving down. And of course, later on, we're going to talk about the board and start that dialogue, and that's where Councilor Fournier and Councilor Lozani will lead into that conversation, because it will be a council board or committee. Is there any other questions with that second paragraph?
Do we know how many members or term? That's all going to be determined today.
Well, the conversation, yes, we'll start. Let's go on to the third paragraph on farm. This is one that we had significant amount of editing to during one of our first
We
meetings.
did, yeah.
Can we move up on the screen a little bit, Eric, so people can see? Thank you.
There's some language in the state farm and open space law that describes, I forget whether it's farm or farm products, but is an excellent description, and where it's going to have to go to them, I'm wondering if we should take a look at that as a definition, and if we're comfortable with it, why it would make it that much, make that connection much stronger, see?
So it would mirror what currently exists?
Pardon?
It would mirror what currently exists at the state level?
Yes. Now, basically, it's on the application for farm and forest, farm and open space law, but I don't have a copy with me.
Is that the farmland tax law?
That, yeah, basically,
Talks about minimum size, use,
Down at the
income,
bottom of the page, I think.
agricultural products.
Yeah, but I think they feel like I think a farm produces agricultural products, and they define the farm products. Perhaps you could read it for the
Yep.
group.
Under state law, agricultural products are defined as those plants and animals and their products that are useful to humans, and includes, but is not limited to, forages and sod crops, grain and feed crops, dairy and dairy products, poultry and poultry products, bees and bee products, livestock, livestock products and fruits, berries, vegetables, flowers, seeds, grasses, and other similar products, or any other plant, animal, or animal products that supply humans with food, feed, fiber, or fur. Agricultural products does not include trees grown and harvested for forest products.
That's interesting.
Does not.
Does not.
State exempts forest products. Why do you think that is, Bill? Any idea?
Probably to do with the length of the rotation.
Bill,
Length
could you use the microphone,
of the
just so we could hear you?
rotation.
Because that would fall under the realm of tree growth. See, forest products would
Yeah.
fall.
Under something like an orchard or something.
No, an orchard is an agricultural crop,
Yeah, 'cause
but basically, your forest and forest products would be included in the tree growth application.
This is maybe just a little bit more detailed than
Okay.
that.
What was Kathy just reading?
From the
That-
farmland tax
yeah.
law.
And that question came from what?
Definition of farm.
Yeah,
Okay.
Maurice was proposing replacing this with that.
Okay.
You see,
There was-
a farm would produce those products, and you see, the forest would produce forest products.
But for us, we
And-
would have to include the,
But I felt this definition basically ties a product to human consumption and to human benefit, and where the state is already comfortable with it, I just felt it might be nice to, if we had something similar.
As far as the definition of farm that Stephanie Gilbert sent you, I don't know if you have those papers with you, but her definition was pretty short. I don't know if you want me to read it. It says, farm means any parcel of land containing more than 10 acres, which she said is not, there's lots of farms starting up with fewer than 10 acres, but she said that farm means any parcel of land containing more than 10 acres which is used in the raising of agricultural products, livestock or poultry, or for dairying. The term farm under Agricultural and Resource Protection District shall be further defined as meeting the following criteria: at least 50% of the total annual income of the farm occupant.
Yeah,
That's
see,
the
that's
old
And that's the
ordinance.
old one.
ordinance.
Right, and at least 10 acres of the farm, so those are the two over there. But the part on the beginning, that's all she has for defining farm.
And she said in her emails, and when we talked with her, she goes, the key is to be less prescriptive.
Right, she did, I
She
saw.
said that several times, less prescriptive in definitions. I'm not sure if it makes any fundamental difference if we mirror the state's definition of farming, obviously with the inclusion of fiber, timber, in our definition, or, because I heard a lot of the same words that we have in ours. It's one of the things that I think we should definitely make sure that the state follows up with us on, but again, it's, what's the group think?
Well, one thing I'd like to add is that I think we need to keep in mind that there are plenty of farms that don't produce things for human consumption. They produce feed for livestock. You know, if you're harvesting hay, you're not feeding that to humans. I don't think so, anyway. And a lot of the corn that's grown is feedstock for
So you're saying
cattle and
not to
other
use
things.
the,
Well,
not to use the state one because it talks about human consumption as the,
I think you may want to just modify the for the human consumption. It could be for human and animal consumption.
Right,
do you,
It includes but is not limited to, is the
Okay.
wording in this.
Human consumption?
and it says right here in the first part of it, it's forages and sod crops, grains, and feed crops.
Okay,
yeah. So I wonder,
Dairy products.
okay.
I wonder, and Maurice and Kathy, what do you think, to use that language, because then we're agreeing with the state language, And in terms of a review, it might help expedite it, but I think having that language in here is probably I think, probably the way to go. What does everybody else think? Is there a reason not to change it?
So we're recommending that we change the definition of farm and farmer.
To the farmland
The
tax
state-
law?
Give me the quote, read that off to me, Kathleen?
Yeah, please read it.
It
Okay.
is according to the Farmland Tax Law Bulletin, Property Tax Bulletin number 20.
Number 20?
Yep.
Have any opposition to that? I mean, anybody think this is not a good idea? No? We just got to make sure there's a note. It must include timber and timber fibers.
Well, it may be that the definition of farm or agriculture can be what was just described, but then we need to have a definition for forest or forested land, or, so that that's inclusive within the ordinance, but it's got its own definition.
Okay.
Unless you want to have a definition of farm and forest inclusive under the same paragraph, if you will. Not to split hairs, but
Yeah, and at a certain point, I think we are
that's
splitting
what we
hairs a
are.
bit. I mean, it's a lot, it's just a different way of looking at it, but let's look at adopting that language. Everybody in agreement on that? Okay? But with-
I think the objective, though, is not to exclude forestry from what we're trying to achieve with the ordinance. Is that
Correct.
generally understood, or is there?
Right. There are two other things, wind farms and fish farms. Do you think that that would be understood under that definition? Wind farms and fish farms?
Well, we go further down, and we talk about
Yeah.
what's allowable usage. You know, so if we could, let's,
Because this was pretty inclusive as far as.
yeah. Let's turn the page and look at,
Maybe
the
I-
Agricultural Resource Protection District further.
Jason?
Sir?
Maybe I could clear that up a little bit. Do we all understand that ACF is Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry? It's all one state, cabinet level person. And there's a new one just been appointed in January. And in that, that's agriculture, which is farming, is we're trying to describe here. Conservation is more environmental regulation, botanicals, wetlands, significant wildlife areas, that sort of thing. Forestry is more the commercial business of forest harvesting. So those three components, instead of all three being cabinet level people, are one. And there's three directors and one cabinet level person. So I don't know if that clears up anything, but that's the way it is now.
Do you know who was nominated for that position? I didn't catch who the new commissioner was going to be.
Beal, Amanda Beal.
She had been the executive director of the Maine Farmland Trust.
Okay. Good enough.
I think you may have accomplished your, the objective to connect forestry when you get to the next page.
The
that,
next, yeah, top of,
It uses agriculture and resource conservation land use in determining whether you can build a house, and I think the intent is to allow that to include either farm or forestry.
Do we need to be explicit about that, Eric?
I think we should. We may want to define
Right.
agriculture and resource conservation land use as including farms, forest, and whatever else you want.
yeah, I agree with Eric.
It's in there at section 2. Section 3 as well, state farm, open space, or forest management. Minimum investment, reforestation.
Yep. I think it's all there.
As we're moving ahead, Jason, the last paragraph about a farmer, are we comfortable with that? We haven't really reviewed that.
Oh, the definition of the farmer and the farm, yeah. So, They were kind of in the state definition, and Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, you
Weren't
read the
we
whole thing.
using
It was
the
pretty
text? Yeah.
merged together, the definition of farm and farmer. Am I wrong on that assumption?
Can you read that again, please? The farmer part, because they're both under tax law number 20, right?
Do you want me to read the whole of the,
Of definition of farmer
From the state.
from the state.
I don't know if it explicitly defines farmer in that document.
in this document, I don't think that it does.
They just explain the farm. So about that paragraph, are there changes that people think need to be made? The one that starts a farmer, also called an agriculturer, is a person.
I'm happy with the definition.
I haven't heard agriculture done before.
Down south,
Yeah,
Who made up that word?
Yarmouth. So, yeah, are there any, thank you for bringing that. Is there any changes or recommendations on the last paragraph of page 1? Definition of farmer?
Okay with that.
Someone who owns or runs a farm might be even the way to shorten it up even further, right?
That's right.
Agriculturer.
Agriculture, okay. Let's go on to page 2 then. This gets in the, kind of the gist of the changes to this ordinance, other than the definitions. Then we've debated and talked about a lot of these. Let's just go through them again, and they're in blue.
Can I just, before we go, do we feel comfortable with that, the top line? The Agricultural and Resource Protection District further defines agriculture and resource conservation land use. Do we say
As meaning in this
including, is this bill where we might put something about forests or no?
Yeah, I
I think it would be important to include that word in there.
After the word agriculture, should we just have comma, forestry?
Or after agriculture and resource land use, including, do we say farms and forestry, or I don't know what the language would be, but.
Well, it's the heading is the name of the district, not, unless we're gonna start changing the
Oh,
name
no,
of the
no,
district.
okay. So how do you think it should be phrased?
So where did that title first originate, the Agricultural and Resource Protection District?
That came from the 1964 ordinance.
Okay, so it's also a forest district, Agricultural Resource Protection and Forest District, or Agricultural Forest and Resource Protection District.
Or,
I think if we get adding too much to this, we actually fundamentally change
We
what
need to
this
put-
meaning. Agriculture, we've already defined agriculture, inclusive of forestry. Okay, it's part of agriculture. And just the addition of one word in there, okay, Forestry Resource Protection District turns into a complete conservation zone at that point, one could argue, that the trees couldn't be cut down, there'd have to be some sort of permission. This is agriculture, and forestry is part of agriculture as defined earlier.
Well, number 2 has the word forestry in it, and number 4 has reforestation in it. So if you want the word forestry in it, would that suffice? Oh, and you also have number 3,
Yeah, I
open
think-
space or forest management
And
preservation.
3 out of the 4 down below
So
talk
there are
about
3
forestry.
references to that.
Yeah, I think forestry is pretty well covered.
If I may, if we could just insert the word, after where it says defines agriculture and resource conservation land use, could you put agriculture, comma, forestry, comma, and resource conservation land use?
Yes.
And then I think that would achieve
Yeah, that's
what
what
we're
I
all looking for.
tried to say.
Agreed?
rhymes pretty nice with ACF. Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry. That's the state program.
Okay.
And there's something to be said about conformity with state and federal guidelines.
Right, yeah. I've got a comment or a question on that, Jason. This describing the farmer, I think, has come with over the last 50 or 60 years, with people trying to bend this agricultural ruling that we had, that old Blackwell report, of 50% income and 10 acres, bend it so that they can have housing. And I maintain that a guy that owns woodland and makes his living off it deserves all the definition that farmer deserves. There's more of it probably in Auburn than agriculture or farming. So I think it gets more complicated the more we try to describe a farmer. It should be a farmer or a forester or a landowner with acres of forest land. Forestry always takes a back seat in this.
Well, 73% of our agricultural land today is forested, so it's interesting. Brian, you wanted to say something?
Well, a little bit later on when we get into this and we're talking about the requirements, there are possible additions, as Kathy brought up right here, the Bulletin 20, and it talks about farmland. There is a Bulletin 19 that refers to forestry and what constitutes forestry. So if we want to be inclusive, you know, to cover what Bill would like in forestry, the same requirement would be made for forestry that there would be for farming, and that you have to meet the status according to the tax bulletin prepared by the state. So you could put that inclusion in it, and it would include forestry as well as farming.
I think we did that in number 2.
Where am I at?
No, I'm sorry. No, number 3.3. Not the 50% part, but the land area enrolled in the state farm, open space, or forest management program, which the Bulletin 19 and 20 are referencing.
Right.
References to tax assessment programs, yeah.
Yeah, it says 36 dash, et cetera, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. So it's in there. I mean, I think at this point, it's well defined that forestry, granted, we don't like to necessarily, I'm sure foresters might not be happy being called farmers, but in this context, they are very, very well represented, I think, proportionally.
Yeah. Well, a problem with that is saying forestry. Forestry doesn't mean there's no real parallel with that in farming. Forestry is a study. It's a whole field in itself, as is farming. So you
Bill, are you
almost-
really referring to the forest landholder or the, as opposed
Yeah,
to
really,
forestry as a
the
profession? We're
law
not
got
really
the-
talking about the profession, we're
Yeah,
talking
this is a
about,
discussion we haven't had in this group, Peter, is the difference between logger and forester, landowner. These are all different things in that field of forestry.
Right.
So, you know, I think anybody that owns a woodlot that you could get a couple $1,000s a year of income out of ought to have the same exact treatment as
Right.
the farmer.
I believe they do.
And
If you read this,
so-
they actually do have the same, for, I guess, the 35,000-foot view of this, with regards to differences or similarities between forestry and agriculture, and this is from someone who's not not in either one of those professions, is pretty clear. So you're harvesting timber, you're harvesting corn.
Right.
You're working the land and reforesting, or you're replanting, okay? You're generating revenue from it, or you're investing money into it, or you're setting aside portions of it for conservation for future use, yet to be determined, okay? So all those things, when you kind of take away the crop itself, are similar, and the same, I believe. The only difference is, what we talked about before was the IRS Form F, point number 1, okay? We talked about a forestry equivalent, which there really wasn't a clean one on, and you brought this up, Bill, but also having an equivalent from an accountant stating that more than $1,000 of income was generated from the acts of timber harvest or fiber harvest as previously defined. So there's conformity in everything. It covers both timber as well as crops or any other type of agriculture.
A big practical difference, Jason, is you don't have to live there like you do on a dairy farm.
Then you don't have to live there.
A forest can be a non-participating owner, and they don't have to live there. It might be better if they did. They might have more time to limb trees or prune or something, but you don't have to live there. And most farming that's done in Auburn, I think, now, you don't have to live there. Like Bell Farms don't have to live on their land. So that distinction about where we've twisted and bent the old rule to get housing, gotta have a farm so I can have a house, it kind of goes out the window if you add forestry in there.
Well, no, I want to try to move this along because we're getting a little off topic.
Yeah.
But it tells, I mean, you bring up a point of you don't have to live on the land. Nothing here says you have to. So then it's really not a point that we should break up, or bring up, I should say.
You know, in the days before we came as politically correct as our current generations, the original ordinance, this zone was named Farm and Forest Zone.
Farm and forest. No,
Farm and forest.
old is new again.
So, basically, it was all-inclusive, and basically, once they started being a little more politically correct, and natural resources or conservation or whatever, basically, it got more tangled as we went on, see. And I think sometimes simplicity has advantages.
Well, let's keep going through that same vein. You know, what's old is new again, and simplicity is good. I couldn't agree more.
Because they're really partners.
Yeah, and I don't think, especially in Auburn, with 73 to 75% of the ag land forested, one can't survive without the other. So let's keep moving down here, though. Let's look at the points. This is where we start looking at the definition of farmer. Okay, this is the substantial change from the existing ordinance. And give everybody just a second to read over it again. And we did deliberate on this during several meetings, but now we got fresh eyes.
Number 4, I don't think is an adequate measurement. Because nowadays, $1,000 is a very small amount of investment. I can make that with 2 tractor payments.
It's good.
What does the state use? Doesn't the state have a figure they use for farms?
I thought it was 1,000.
No, the state uses 2. The federal government uses 1,000.
But it's not as far as the
Not
state
income,
goes,
this is
it's the
an
amount of.
Oh, I'm sorry,
it's the
investment.
This is-
amount of
yeah, this is
income
investment,
generated
not
and not
earnings.
the amount of investment.
Well, again, we're looking at, you know, the
Investment.
simplicity of the ordinance, looking at the language, looking at is this readily available? Can someone pick this up and read it and understand it? We've debated and we've talked about these dollar amount limits, the acreage amount limits, and this is not the right time to bring these up and have to rehash them all again, okay? And frankly, that's not what we should be talking about. We should be talking about, is this easy to understand? Have we done our job? Can planning board now pick this up and carry it forward? And can city council use it post-planning board review to make an educated decision and an appropriate vote?
Would planning board look at an amount and say this is inadequate and make a change? Or are they basing it on our expertise and recommendation?
They're going to, well, we don't get involved a lot in the amounts. What we would say, if you're agreeing with a form, the 1040F or the state form, whatever that one happens to be, we would review it, but from an overall thing, it's going to be whatever we suggest and whatever the council approves. You know, we might come back and say, well, okay, the state's higher. We might say, okay, $2,000 is a more usable sum, and that way it would be inclusive of both the IRS and the state. But that's just a possibility. I mean, I can only.
So, thank you. So Kathy, would the state is 2,000, correct?
State is 2,000 income, at least 2,000 in income. What we have here is a minimum.
You're talking about
investment.
minimum investment.
This is investment.
So on number 4, the minimum investment, one of the things that we never talked about was the frequency of that investment. Is that, were some people thinking a one-time investment or an annual investment?
I don't think that way.
I think it's unclear the way we have it.
We never said whether it was annual or
We didn't.
anything else.
We talked about filing or submitting a Schedule F from the IRS, which is an annual event, and we discussed annual, but you're right, there's nothing in here that states, is this annual, biannual, or et cetera?
No, but I think where there might be some objection in the group is that the threshold might be so low as to say, well, if I made it, I bought a garden tractor lawnmower for $5,000, bingo, I've hit my threshold,
Forever.
now I can maintain my estate that way. I think if I'm trying to read the group, we're looking at more of an ongoing
Yes.
investment in the agriculture or forestry or conservation activities.
And when you
It's-
fill out that form, I'm sorry,
It's more of a commitment.
So,
when you fill out that Form F every year, you need to show another $1,000 investment.
I do.
So we should probably at least mimic that this is a yearly
that's what I was
requirement. I'm
getting
not
to.
sure of
So
the
if we just
amount,
said
but
a minimum annual investment of $1,000 or more. And that way, there are people that have legitimate farming activities who don't expect to earn a
Yeah.
living.
Talked about that, yeah.
But are you filling out your investment numbers on the Form F or only your
No,
income?
it's just
on-
income numbers.
So that
Just
this,
income.
No,
the
no, this
federal
would
government
be-
doesn't use the investment
Yeah, well,
measure. I
but
don't
number 4 doesn't relate to that form, but it's a separate one of 4 criteria.
Would it be easier for you to administer this, Eric, if it were based on income rather than investment? I mean, your department is the one that's going to have to oversee this.
I guess it relies on an existing federal form on the income side, whereas we're creating an investment side locally.
So that would be more work, investment. Or am I reading into that?
We'd need to be clear on what kind of documentation we're expecting. My understanding was annually was the intent, but I agree it's not completely clear in the language.
So then, are they required to submit annually to 2 of these 5, or 2 of these 4 points in your mind, Eric? Is that sort of the way you're reading this?
I understood that was the intent, because we talked about annual monitoring, but I think it needs to be made clearer if that is the intent.
It says verification of the above may be completed by a mutually agreeable third party if not available as a public record or if confidential information is needed to make the determination.
Otherwise, or if I really don't want, anyone to see at the city hall how much money I'm actually making.
Right, sure.
Yeah. It's nice when a verification, on a federal Form F, if it's submitted, you can black out actually how much revenue you made, knowing that you wouldn't file one unless you made over $1,000 in revenue. So that's kind of an easy, litmus test, if you would, or hurdle to pass over with regards to you don't do it if you don't make it. So hence one of the reasons for conformity with federal was to make staff time easier. Again, this is on the earning side of it.
It's also very convoluted, that form. Takes a lot of work to fill out the Schedule F.
And it takes a lot of work to fill everything out. I mean, it's the IRS.
One is in particular because they ask for itemization. There's 3 or 4 others, depreciation, et cetera.
Yeah. It's the government.
I really have a problem with number 4 because basically we are measuring annual output of the land. And investment doesn't measure output or the income generated. So actually, from the standpoint of the community, really we need some measurement of the ongoing productivity if it's going to be productive. But regardless, how much money a person invests, it's the annual productivity that we're trying to measure.
Yeah, I would like to refer down to the Crossroads study, identifying that over 73% of our current agricultural land is forested, and their estimated cost to clear the land is at $5,000 per acre. Now, again, this doesn't cover people that are in the forestry industry, again, selling stumpage, but I'm talking from an agricultural standpoint. The investment needed to bring that land back up to productivity is significant. So it's hard, and I think we addressed some of this down here about the 24-month compliance within 2 years or 24 months, because it's going to take a significant amount of investment and time in order to bring up potential farmland and agricultural land into productivity. To your point, we have to recognize that we've let our farmland go
I think
to seed.
in our earlier conversation, there was one of the reasons that number 4 was proposed, and we had voted on it as a group, albeit without identifying whether that was an annual or a one-time investment or some other frequency. But the idea that was raised is that some people will be producing agricultural products for their own consumption, which could have a, meaningful value for their own extended family. And then some people are growing things that they wish to donate to Good Shepherd Food Bank, other nonprofit entities, just because they wish to, and they're not in need of making a living from farming. So this would provide at least evidence that there's an ongoing investment in agricultural activity, regardless of how much income they make from it. And I think one of the big topics in our very first couple of meetings was recognizing that both the Crossroads report and the original ad hoc committee on agriculture had both recommended eliminating the current 50% income test, albeit some expressing some desire to replace it with something. And these 4 items are the replacements. So that's how we got to these 4 items. And so we wanted to make sure that you could fulfill not just the spirit, but the letter of the ordinance by achieving compliance with 2 out of these 4.
To ensure that you are using the property as a farm. You are farming the property, not just living on the property or building a home on the property.
Correct.
And not farming. So I agree with number 4. I don't think that's a problem having it there, and I think that is another check, another balance. I mean, you can select from any one of those 4. I know that there are different forms of investments, how much you invest in your farm. It depends on the farm and the nature of the farming, but I think I would not ask to remove annual. My personal feeling is a minimum annual investment of $1,000. That would be one of the items that may or may not be selected as proof, but if you're saying,
It's not a requirement.
Right.
It's
And
one of the 4.
Right,
Kathy, you're the one that brought up the 2. I think that was really actually quite good foresight, really, because not just 1, which was originally being talked about, but rather 2 out of the 4. So, yeah. There's, talking about the simplicity, I think something was, my notes here show something was brought up about defining annual. And with everybody's kind of approval, let's make sure that we insert annual as needed in points 1 and point 4.
So in points 1, after the 4th word minimum, should say minimum annual required
Yes, I'm sorry.
farm
yeah,
income?
right.
And then same thing in point 4, minimum annual investment of.
Jason, what was, we talked about the forestry parallel to the Schedule F, and we talked about a third-party verification. What, did we agree on any form?
No, you actually brought this up, Bill. There is, you said there was no direct, if I'm going off memory here, no direct comparison to the Schedule F for forestry, and that we talked about having an accountant certify that you produced over $1,000 in forest products or fiber products from the land, the lawn?
Yeah, if you harvest wood in Maine, you need a forest operations permit. And when you file one of those, then you're obliged to send in an annual report of what you've done. And that creates a statement of stumpage sold. And that's what I was objecting to.
You were objecting, yeah, because you didn't want people to know how much money you made total.
Didn't want that in
Right.
towns and cities where I own land to know what I did there.
Sure.
So then that kind of parallels the
Let me see.
Schedule F.
And all you're supposed to show here is the minimum required farm income for the file.
There's a
You don't have to
slash
actually
through that
show the
Yeah.
Schedule F.
Well,
No, this one you have to show, for agriculture, non-forestry, you have to show the
You
Schedule
wouldn't
F.
show, you wouldn't need to show it for anything, right? You could-
No, you'd show it. You'd show the Schedule F. You have to present the
Doesn't
filing
actually
and present.
say that. It says at least the minimum required farm income for the filing of an IRS Schedule F. format.
If you look down at the second paragraph, verification of the above may be completed by a mutually agreeable third party if not available as a public record or if confidential information is needed to make the determination. In other words, it is intended to be just like our current ag ordinances presented to staff, YTD, yet to be determined, and that's up to the management, in order to verify that. And if it can't be, then a third party.
A
verifiable record.
So they could they use their income tax return if they didn't file a Schedule F or something like that? That's verifiable, or?
The Schedule F is part of their tax return, as the same thing as your
I see.
Schedule K1.
As a farmer,
just like your
it's-
K1.
I got you.
Right? It's the
Okay.
same concept. Okay.
I just want to make sure that, Maurice, you had mentioned the thing for number 4, that we're talking about investment, you want to talk about sort of return on this as opposed to investment. Do we feel that that's covered throughout this?
That's all right.
Okay,
I'm a minority.
okay.
Okay. So let's talk about the verification aspect. That paragraph is next. And like I said, I'll read it again. Verification of the above may be completed by a mutually agreeable third party if not available as a public record or if confidential information. Bill, to your point, you don't want the town to know how much you're making off the farmland or stumpage. Okay, that sentence. So I'll just read that, and then we can finish reading the rest, and we can come back to this.
We have XXX years in here.
Yeah, I know so.
So when somebody wants to build a house, they're going to come to you and you're going to hold this out and say, I need 2 of these from you, right? And they're going to go off and find which 2 they feel they can provide and then return at that point. And at that point, that's the first filing that they've done. And they would then be expected to file annually on that date thereafter? Is that the way you read this?
With their building permit application, they would have to show us a farm plan that demonstrates their intent to meet at least 2 of those
2 of
requirements.
these requirements, okay.
And it looks like the way that it's written, that would be a staff-level building permit application, the way that this is written. I know we had talked about having either the agricultural board or the agricultural board and the planning board look at those on the front end. Right now, I guess the way that I would see this working, the way that it's written, is they come in, they apply for their permit. If they show us they plan to meet 2 out of the 4 of these, staff would be in the position where they would issue the building permit. And 2 years later, they would ask for relief from this board. I guess that concerns me that, you don't really have to show that you're going to meet it at the beginning, but you could ask for relief later. Maybe the board should review the initial application.
But the board, I mean, we talked about this, yes. And I think subsequent meetings, we talked about advisory not being able to give permission, okay, or approve or not approve. And the reasons are pretty simple. It turns into a favoritism thing, a fairness doctrine. When you get a group of people that aren't duly elected saying you can or cannot do this in a completely arbitrary manner versus zoning and ordinance. So that concerns us, and it should concern us. But looking at it, yes, there is, and it continued for XXX years. This is something that we have to come back on.
Shouldn't that be continued annually? Just take out the words for XXX years, just continued annually. The idea is that the plan that's submitted and evaluated after 24 months is expected to be an ongoing, or you
Is
can
that
say.
practical for?
I guess it would be nice if there was a sunset, or else every house that's ever
Yeah, I was gonna say,
constructed
every
under this
house will
ordinance
be doing this
accumulating
forever.
over time.
They're not houses, they're farms.
Well, every farm.
Okay.
They are a house.
Well, I have to look at it, the farm dwelling, right? But let's look at it this way. I've been looking at a bunch of houses. An ordinance, it's pretty easy, it's all online. I sent you an email about one that have been built after 1964. Driving by, talking to them, haven't had farms for years. They're actively living there. Okay, maybe they were granted relief, not sure. But there's multiple examples of this that I could just find looking at a computer and a website. So, I mean, we're not enforcing it today, in other words, and that does concern me. Enforcement's important. I think we do need, as the city council, needs to enforce the city manager in enforcing ordinances and staffing of those, and making sure that ordinances are followed, compliance.
But we can only do that if it's reasonably practical, and I mean, if we, right now, there is no requirement that they submit.
Do you have an
some-
alternative?
Well, I'm
'Cause
just
there's
saying
no-
there's
it's-
nothing.
You're right. I mean, it could be burdensome.
I think Eric's saying there could be a sunset provision that could be.
After so many years, you don't have to do it anymore?
Well, I'm just thinking if we, let's say we have 10 houses a year for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So we have 200 houses. Now we have a staff person that has to spend multiple hours every year on each one of those collecting the information. And over time, it becomes a lot of houses.
Yeah.
Becomes a lot of farms that require this annual documentation. I'm not saying that it can't be done. We can do it. I think people should be mindful of the amount of time and be willing to fund the staff to do that.
I'm concerned about the sunsetting after X amount of years, because we'll get into the same position that we're in now,
What's
Could it-
that?
Could it
where
be that,
nobody's in compliance.
could it be that a farm resident needs to submit an annual certification that they meet the criteria and that their compliance certificate is subject to an audit, and then the staff will just take a random sample
That's
Or maybe
every
this is,
year and audit, you know, a dozen or 2 dozen instead of 200.
maybe this is something that the agricultural board or whatever takes on as a responsibility. Is that possible? I mean, we've created this ill-defined.
I think they're all options.
I'm going to ask city manager to come in, and because staff, and this is his, obviously in his job description. Peter?
Yep.
Any comments on compliance? You want to sit down? Sure. There you go. Might be a while.
Is this the lucky chair?
Oh, yeah.
In terms of compliance, are you thinking of the difficulty of the compliance? Is that what people are focused on?
Monitoring the compliance.
I think what Eric,
The cost and
yeah,
manpower requirements.
I think what Eric was outlining is a concern. How do we monitor this? We're staffed only to a certain extent now. People are busy doing what they're doing. I'm not sure how manageable it would be.
And what do we do if they fall out of compliance? Do we have anything that talks about what happens if they, I mean, I thought this was one of the things that we sort of brought up as an issue when we talked about it before, was there's really, you know, right now, the ordinance reads that you can actually knock down someone's house that's out of compliance, which isn't gonna happen, you know? No one's gonna be knocking down houses, so, I just, you know, I mean, if we're gonna worry about their compliance forever, but not do anything if they don't comply, that seems kind of crazy.
But the compliance has to do with property. You're using the property to farm.
Right.
If you no longer use the property to farm, then your land, the taxes you're paying on that are farm taxes, not residential taxes. So to me, what would make, it would go into residential, and you pay residential taxes. Different zoning. Yep.
It's going to be a challenge.
Well, that's the challenge.
I don't know if you're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the legality.
I don't think they can be taxed
Doing
differently.
spot zoning then, and you can't do that.
No.
So I wonder, Peter made the suggestion about checking not every single one, but
Well, in a lot of business activities, and this is really, we're talking about people certifying that they're engaged in a certain type of business activity, okay, agriculture or forestry or conservation, that they certify, they sign, you know, some form that we create, that, you know, it's sort of under oath, I certify that I've complied with X, Y, Z.
What happens?
And,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and then, you know, they submit that, maybe it's a statement they submit when they pay their tax bill every year. You know, we'll figure out the logistics. And then the staff, not having the manpower to review 200 of these a year, will take a sample of those that fall into this category, and they'll audit them. And those people that, you know, get the unlucky number drawn, they've got to provide the evidence to support their certification. So it could be any year.
Again, but then we're back to what happens if they aren't?
Well, that's,
What happens, has anybody audited your income yet?
No,
Wait,
good.
okay.
But I
But let's
don't
say if you're
live-
not,
I-
if you're not in compliance, I'm
I
just
live in
hypothetical.
my farmhouse was built in the 1800s.
Well, let's pretend that it was built in 1965, okay? And so it was built in 1965, and you're not meeting it right now. What would be your understanding of what would happen? What would the action of the city
My
take?
understanding, according to this, would be I just shake the dice. Maybe I'll be forced out, maybe I won't.
So
Probably
that, but forced out would be an option, I agree. That's just not a relative, that's not viable. But what happens right now, let's go a junkyard. They're not a junkyard, he's doing something else, or he's a farm, and all of a sudden he turns into a junkyard. What power of levying fines or that staff would have in order to prevent that action?
Staff can issue citations, 105 for the first one, 210 for the second, 420 for the third, 840 for the fourth, and then we could initiate a civil case and do up to $2,500 a day. $100 minimum per day, up to $2,500.
If you're looking at it as a business, and you already have equitable, or excuse me, you already have precedent on fines and the legal authority to levy those fines up to a certain point before you have to go to a court, then I don't see what the difference is between farming and a junkyard. Appropriate use is appropriate use.
You're talking philosophical, there's a huge difference.
It's all, no, but just, I mean, yes, there is, okay, don't get me wrong, but it's a business is a business.
Tax-wise, there is.
Having the right business or having a business for the zone, and we already have something in the books in order to penalize that individual and get legal recourse. I mean, $2,500 a day for not, growing $1,000 in crops, I don't know who would say that's okay, or even $220 or $400. I mean,
Even $100.
yeah, even $100. Yeah, so I think there's already in existence something. I think those can be applied without us thinking of anything new. Those can be applied already to this ordinance.
And the agricultural zone, or the agricultural commission, or
Board.
What's that?
Advisory
The
board.
board, there we go, thank you, would have the ability to waive that in certain cases, right? Because I think
We
they
don't know
do
yet.
now.
We don't know yet, but I think it's something that we should make a note of for the later conversation
Yeah, because
tonight.
there are people who, through, as they say in the current ordinance, through no fault of their own, are older folks who are no longer farming.
well, we need to accommodate people who are in retirement years, who
right.
become disabled.
Yeah.
Or they started a farm
The ag-
producing something
board.
and market forces,
Yep.
competition.
Right, right.
Basically
Yep.
rendered them non-competitive and unable to fulfill that.
So this is,
If someone built a house and then got tired of farming, well, that'd be okay.
Well,
That would be
What-
no fault of their own, they just had too much enthusiasm to begin with.
well, and I think that's part
Well,
of,
I
we're
mean, that
beginning
could
to
happen
sketch
with
out the
anybody
ag board responsibilities here.
Yeah.
That's the place where this discussion
I
could
don't think
go on.
lack of enthusiasm. I know you're joking. I can tell you're laughing already, but I don't think lack of enthusiasm is uncontrollable.
But does it seem reasonable to have this be a bullet point that we bring forth when we talk about the ag board?
Yeah.
They're the ones who should be able to look at with a objective, subjective eye, different from the planning board maybe.
Previous language, it was stated that the planning board would do that, so did that get changed from
Yeah,
this form to
I
this
think that,
form?
because we talked about it midway, I think the Agriculture Advisory Board is a good intermediate step as a potential conflict resolution, as well as a recommendation board too, up to a planning board if it gets that high. Ideally, I'd like to see, going back to the Crossroads report or recommendations on an ag board to help promote sustainable farm agriculture, forestry, to help promote farmers markets and so forth, and to help people fix some of their problems. A board of peers, if you would. And hopefully a lot of this can be settled here versus it going up to planning board or appeals. So let's look at this, and if I could, let's to add the Ag Advisory Board concept in here. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I recommend we stick with annual compliance. It's always easier to pull back a little based upon studies done by staff saying, compliance management might be too difficult. And there also could be a increased role for the Ag Advisory Board in compliance as well, post fact. So let's keep it as compliant or as strict as we can make it, and then look back at the practicality of implementation later. Okay, so moving along to livestock, and this is, and frankly, I'm going to ask that we not get too deep into this, because this is a point that the state really had some qualms about. They thought we were very, very prescriptive, and frankly, a lot of what we had in our ordinance was contrary to state regulation or state recommendations. So I'd like it if we did not get too involved in the definition of swine, bovine, goats, et cetera.
Because this now is the state standard.
Yeah,
Correct.
state, moving to the state. This, I don't believe, was changed to the state standard. Eric?
No, this, I think, is a modified, the text that's in black, that's not underlined or overstricken, is our existing language, and then the underlines are new language that this committee had asked for through the process. So this does not match the state definition. If you'd like it to, that's.
And that was something we wanted to defer out to planning board because of the legal constraints with it, and marrying up ordinance with state legal.
So, Brian, this would be something that you would be paying attention to, the definition, the animals, the livestock definition, to have it align with the state definition?
Well, from Eric might know. We've not dealt with it as such this way, but the size of the farm and the number of animals. So
Is not what you guys would deal with?
we're dealing with just the farm. I have not yet dealt with a case where we have discussed that.
Okay.
We do have a recommendation from Department of Ag, though, on what a definition for livestock should look like.
Right.
So we should then insert that here?
You can either do that, or you could tell me to ask the planning board to look at it, but it would help, if you want it changed, to just tell me as a group that you'd like it changed in that way, and we can do that, or
We have a
defer
copy
to
of
planning
it.
board.
Do we know what it is?
Yeah, we do.
They sent it to us.
Is it this form here with the yellowed out?
It was a.
Yes.
Okay, what it says is cattle, 1 bovine animal unit per acre of cleared hay pasture land. Horse, 1.5 animal units per acre of cleared hay pasture land. Sheep, 3 animal units per acre.
Yeah, this is our existing. This is our existing.
Okay, well, that's what they had.
There's a whole.
I think her comments noted some of the differences in the state.
They didn't comment on that being a problem. There's nothing to refer to the comments on the end. It was highlighted in yellow, but
Recommend is, we did go through everything line by line several meetings ago. I say we pass this along to the planning board to adopt or not adopt. Reason is, usually when you deal with government organizations, you'll get different definitions each time you ask. And I got a feeling if we did something and changed it to match up what they sent already, they'd probably change it on us again.
yeah, they would.
That's
I mean,
pretty
and then
pessimistic,
you
I
have to
think,
go
but-
over it again.
Yeah,
Let's
I
do
think,
what makes sense.
Yeah, let's just send it up to them and have them deal with that. We do have in here definition of forested land, means land that is used in the growth of trees but does not include ledge, et cetera, et cetera. Any comment on that? That's something that was added.
I might just make a comment on forestry. It seems like that, I don't know that it's understood, but succession is a word that's used in the development of a forest. And if man wasn't here, land goes to forest. It's the top of the line. If there's a big fire, eventually that'll have fireweed, raspberries, other things, it'll grow into a forest. That is the top of the line, not agriculture. That's a man intervention. Now, if you do want to convert it back, and then there isn't the demand for farming, it will go to a forest.
Like it has.
It will. There will be a period of raspberries, weeds, maybe some invasive these days, but that will go to whatever those soils are best suited for. Pine, oak, beech, birch, and hard maple, those are another top-of-the-line successional things. Bogs will fill in. They do grow trees eventually. That's not,
Soft trees.
that's not a bad thing to have this natural process take place. I just think that, you know, we seem to think, well, trees are bad, cost $5,000 an acre to get rid of them. That it's the top of the
Like
line,
weeds.
Jason.
Hey, hey, listen, I'm good, I got trees. Don't say I don't like trees.
All right,
Jeez, that's the last rumor we need to get started, all right? Okay, and the rest of these definitions are added on the last page. We're just pulled, I think actually by Audrey, to help define the state statutes a little bit more that were referred to in points 1 and 3. Okay. Point 3.
The page, Eric. Sorry.
No, I
Okay.
appreciate the reminders. I'm not doing very well at that.
Well, you're multitasking.
Where are we now?
At the end of the page, we're
Last
just
page.
reviewing that this is just, Audrey put this in to define open space and forest land and so forth as part of the state's open space and forest and ag land protections, which provide tax relief for amount of lands placed in each one of those categories.
In these definitions, is there any place where we've changed the 10-acre minimum lot size? We've had various discussions about minimum lot sizes.
It's in the other section of the ordinance,
Oh, okay,
60-144
okay, great, thank you.
or 145. Okay.
According to the
We're not
farmland
covering
tax
that
law,
today? We're not covering that?
No, we are.
Oh, we are,
We're
okay.
going to go through that next.
according to the farmland tax law bulletin that I have here, the state requires for classification 5 contiguous acres.
For farmland.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any, I mean, obviously, these are kind of internal notes. Any other comments on that? No?
No.
Okay, let's, and that wasn't bulleted 20, what was the date on that, Kathy?
This date here issued January 2010.
Okay.
And do you have an updated one?
This one is dated 2015.
And there's a 2017 update, but the only difference, excuse me, the only difference is the inclusion of structure, definition structure, just that one element. So it doesn't relate to the land requirement at all.
Okay.
So those items that we have been reviewing on the 2010, you're saying are still identical to?
Yeah, and basically.
They just didn't post it to the, hasn't posted it to the site yet.
Okay.
The content of Brian's and Kathy's is identical, other than just maybe a word change here and there.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move along to the next handout, 60-144.
The 11019?
Yes, dated, I'm sorry, January 10th, 2019.
Okay.
So, again, red line is what has been edited, or the red line version, in red text, I should say. So we'll start off, obviously, section 60-144, there's only one change that we made, and that was correcting a typo from outline to outlined. Give everybody just a second to read over that. Thanks, Eric.
And everybody should have the January 10th, 19 version. If you don't, I have some extra copies.
Okay. I'd like to move on to section 60-145. Where we started making some substantive changes. And let's just go kind of in order. Let's start with section, well, A, permitted uses. And we'll go with just the first opening paragraph. It's obviously referring back to 60-2, which we just went over. Is there any changes in that opening paragraph? Any edits, any questions? None? Okay, we'll move on. Section 1.A.
Do we need to say in A, subject to approval of
The advisory board?
Of the 2 of the 4 conditions that were required?
It
Or does it imply that?
does that by referencing the section 60-2 farm definition.
Okay.
So are we on 1A now?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for anybody. And Eric, Chris, you feel good with Eric's answer? Okay. Is there any other comments on 1A?
No.
No? Okay, let's move on to 1B.
What does 1B mean?
That's a good question. Hold on, I haven't read it again yet. Eric, yeah, define this one. This has,
Yeah, we had talked about not allowing for subdivisions, and subdivisions under the state law that's referenced here would be a second division of land within a 5-year period. So you could divide once, but then you would have to wait for a 5-year period before you could divide again for the purpose of a residence.
And conveyance would be if they sold it to someone or
Correct.
gave it to someone or something.
Does that conflict with A, or is that redundant, or?
So I think A is only really necessary for the first 5 years of this ordinance, and then the second, B, would apply in an ongoing way every 5 years for as long as this ordinance is in place as it's drafted.
So should B say, following the 5 years referenced in A above, blah, 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 no person shall, if that's the intention, if this is sort of the follow-on?
So what you're saying is you want to ensure that that 5-year,
Well, I just don't know if there's like overlapping standards, that's all.
right, if someone moved
B-
in, bought the house,
Yeah,
and then they
Is B
thought
in
they could.
addition to A, or is B following the 5 years referenced in A?
It seems that B is subsequent to A. So once A has occurred, then B kicks in. But I think that Chris makes a good point. It should be able to be understood.
I mean, I'm
So what I'm getting for meaning out of here is no person shall create by conveyance. This is talking about somebody totally different. It doesn't talk about that same original
So
person.
in other words, when you sell it, if you sold me your
Sell it.
land, then I can't automatically split
Right,
it.
exactly.
Right,
So I,
so it doesn't reset the clock to 0, if you would.
right, so I think this might want to be clarified a little bit, is probably what I'm hearing.
I gotta tell you, I find the ambiguity regarding splitting any lots above 10 acres on 5 years. First of all, there's a lot of ambiguity. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking of a cell biology class. Cells split and then split amongst themselves. So there's nothing in here that references, I
The
have 50
exponential.
acres, okay? I split it in 5 years to 225s. 5 years, 225s become 412 and a halves. Versus the desired intent that we talked about, which was the initial lot as of January 1, 2018, being split only once per 5 years, regardless if the new split lot in year 5 qualifies in year 10. Does that make sense? You know, I vision that cell splitting amongst itself. And that isn't addressed here, I don't think. I mean, I'm reading it, it's not clear. I mean, in theory, you could do that and exponentially increase the splits of a large parcel of land.
Over time, you could.
But the time accelerates. I think, and maybe I'm the only one that thought this, it was my initial observation or belief that you had 100 acres land as of January 1, 2018. You could split it once in 5 years. You could split it again in 5 years. You could split it one more time. But if I read this, if I split it into 2 separate lots, I sell you one and sell you one, and then in 5 years, you're
Right
gonna
away.
split it, you're gonna split, and so it exponentially increases the amount of splits that happen, which was, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the intent, that was not the intent.
No.
Not the intent.
It
So
was
reading this, that could happen here.
We could have legal review it, but I think the challenge with that approach is that if I have 20 let's say I have 40 acres, I sell 20 to Peter. We wait 5 years, on 5 years and a day, I split my 20 again. Peter's out of luck for another 5 years. So I'm taking, property owners are taking rights away from each other by looking at that parent parcel, and I don't think that we could do that.
You'll create all sorts of aberrations with land values then that are unintended consequences.
So one of the unintended consequences, isn't it, that we were talking about is to preserve as much land as possible as well. We don't want to grow exponentially so that everything is totally covered, and now we don't have any farmland, we don't have any, well, the forested land is different, but farmland.
But we're still talking about, you're still creating farms, even because everything that you create has to be a farm
Correct.
according to our definitions.
Correct. Mhm.
If you wanted to put a dwelling on it.
Some people might just wanna split it and buy it and not put a dwelling, of course, you know?
Right.
Doesn't have to have a dwelling.
So do you think, Eric, to have legal look at this to make sure that it's clear what we're trying to address?
And we can specifically ask them if there's a way that you could limit the buyers of properties' rights in the way.
From taking them away from the other person?
I think I understand what you're trying to accomplish, and I think it makes sense. It would slow the development of lots, but I don't think that we could do that.
I'm gonna propose that we eliminate, hold on. A, for a period of 5 years after the effective date of the amendment, no person shall divide. During the 5 years following the adoption of the amendment, only a single dwelling accessory to farming operation under this section may be permitted. Okay. Where does it talk about the split in 5 or after 5 years? Doesn't really,
It really doesn't.
doesn't really
because
say
it does
about any.
not. It just addresses the person, no person shall create by conveyance. It really does not address the next 5 years after that. There's nothing there to indicate what happens next.
So, yeah, and the attempt was to, this committee specifically asked for not allowing the split of land parcels that exist on January 1, 2018 for the purposes of constructing a dwelling for the first 5 years to sort of slow that release of
Right.
house lots.
Right.
So that's,
And we did not put that.
that
yes.
covers the first, that was
5.
intended to cover the
Right.
first 5, but
Theory,
after
this
that,
sunsets in 5.
the
I'm reading it right now, right? It sunsets.
the complete prohibition of splitting land for the purposes of housing sunsets in 5 years. After that, you can divide once every 5 years.
So that's actually more restrictive than it is today. So,
It's only restrictive when we're talking about farm dwellings, of course,
right.
you know? But yes, it is
Well,
more
but-
restrictive than
but
today.
in theory, if somebody met all the other criteria today, you could split land infinitely. As
If you were
long
meeting the 50%.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
right.
Or not building a dwelling.
as-
You
Right,
could
we're
still.
not building a
Oh,
dwelling.
not building,
As long as you had 10 acres on each
Right.
split.
Right,
right.
yeah, there's
Right.
nothing to, you could have 10-acre woodlots everywhere if somebody wanted to.
You know, it's funny, Winston Churchill said that committees are where bad ideas go to die. So I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But this might be, obviously, when we're talking about the Agriculture Advisory Board, this is one of those issues where they should be monitoring if they're doing their jobs as the bylaws are written, as their charter is adopted, trending and looking at what the trends are within ag land, and then recommending any type of change. I mean, look, if there's some sort of massive abuse that happens, okay, that we can't foresee right now, it's as simple as a 2-reading change. It's a moratorium on any buildings until we can figure it out. We did that just recently with marijuana use ordinances. Put a moratorium on any new establishments until we could figure that out. At any point in time, that also could happen at the city council level in order to stop any potential abuse that we can't foresee. In other words, there is some natural stopgaps, if you would. okay, preventive checks and balances to help with any potential, all of a sudden we're seeing a bunch of land being subdivided, and to just sell, division type concept, we stop it. Council stops it. Upon recommendation from the board, though.
The board would have the opportunity to make a recommendation on zoning.
Advisory.
Right.
Okay, recommendation.
And that is happening in communities around us right now, because they're going too fast, they're building too fast, and they have to slow down to see where they're headed next. So it's happening already.
Are you suggesting that we eliminate B?
I'm suggesting that I think at this point we have to keep it in, because there's a fairness doctrine here too.
Needs to be clarified, I think.
And I'm not sure if legally we can say, what the intent was on this after year 5.
We can ask for a specific legal opinion
Absolutely.
on that aspect.
Is everybody in agreement on that?
I do, too.
Because that was our intent.
Yes, the intent, to make sure the intent is what we intended.
Okay.
Jason, now, I'm still unclear on that 1 in 5. Can we have an example of that again?
Yeah,
If you've got 20 acres and you split it once,
it's bad. That's actually not a great
happens?
example.
Yeah.
Because in that example, 20 acres could only be split once. Because it would be 2 10-acre minimum lots. It could not be split further. It could be split, but you couldn't have a dwelling on any of it, right?
okay, so if it was 40, Jason, then what?
Let's use 100, because that really illustrates it, okay?
Yeah.
100 in 5 years could be split into 2 50s. On year 10, 5 years from then, it could be split into 4 25s. Both those 50s are now 25s.
But
So-
that wasn't our intent, right?
Exactly, and then on year 15, subsequent 5 years, each one of those 25s is split into 12 and a half acres. So at that point, you have 8 lots instead of, 1 or 2 lots by that time.
And that's state law?
No, this is ordinance. This is what we're talking about.
That we're creating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where you get into, if you split 100 acres into 2 50-acre lots, but now you have 2 50-acre landowners that are not related, then they should be able to have their 50 acres stand on its own merit with whatever the ordinance allows. And if you have these daisy chains of restrictions that follow one lot owner after the other, then you actually create all sorts of, I think, horrendous consequences.
Right.
So what about a split?
Chris, if you think people were gaming the system up until now, I can only imagine what they would do with that.
at all, right?
That's
Very few.
So what about proposing a large property owner can split it once and the rest has to go into conservation protection?
But now you're telling somebody what they have to do with their
That's
land.
like punishing
Haven't
a
we already
large
been
landowner.
telling folks what they have to do?
That's why I think what we're discussing right now is a way that we can get around telling people what they,
You can't force
All of
anyone to
us.
put their land in conservation.
All of us have
Give them a
restrictions
choice.
on our lands.
We have restrictions, but forcing to put in a conservation easement, in perpetuity, let's say. I mean, we're already giving it as an option. An option's a little bit different than forcing, right? We can't force, we can restrict, but we shouldn't force people into doing something, in my opinion. Brian, I agree with you on that.
Can we wait to see what legal comes back with?
We can. I mean, this is one of those things where we can't answer everything. It's too cost prohibitive to send every change and every meeting to legal for review.
It is.
I know.
They'd be swimming in dollars, or they would. I'm sure lawyers love that, but we're going to try to be smarter than them. So we can absolutely, because I think the intent was there, right? You didn't want it to run away. I mean, the other alternate is to say, your land can be split after, 5 years, and it can be split in subsequent 5-year periods without any farm dwelling allowed to be on that land. Even that's prescriptive, We'll see what legal has to say. Because I've talked to lawyers, and I'm under the opinion right now that a current ordinance is illegal. It's unconstitutional. So, I mean, we don't want to be in that position again.
Now, that brings up another one. If you don't have any house, Jason, can you keep selling off lots?
Yep.
Of course you can.
Any number you want. as
Then
long
the
as they're
planning board has nothing to do with that.
Right.
right.
So
Sell off 100 one-acre lots if you wanted to,
Yeah.
They have to be 10, right?
only if you want a dwelling.
No,
But
the
you could
minimum lot size is still
The
10.
minimum lot size is 10 acres.
What, 10, no, but I mean, if I wanted to sell off 1-acre chunks of my ag land today, without an ordinance, I couldn't do it? Not 1 acre?
No,
That's good enough.
no.
That would be
You
fun.
can't use it as a dwelling, but I'm
could
sure that you
sell-
can sell as many
Without a
acres as you
dwelling.
want.
You could probably sell 3 acres to an abutting 7-acre landowner
Right.
to create a
Create a
conforming lot.
conforming lot, but you can't cleave off.
Hey, excuse me, can I just, you know what, we get a little bit common courtesy in the audience if we're talking? You know, if you guys want to laugh and choke it up, just go outside and do it, seriously. Thank you. Okay, keep going, sorry about that.
You could sell any size lot to an abutter to be merged with their parcel, but if you're creating a new lot, it has to meet the 10 acres.
Okay.
What, Eric, say that again?
So you could sell a piece of your land to an abutting property owner if your remaining piece stayed over 10 acres. It wouldn't matter what size you sold to the abutter as long as it was combined with their lot. But currently, you wouldn't be able to create a new lot that is less than 10 acres in the ag zone.
Really?
That's what it says.
That's the current zone.
That's the assurance piece, is the 10 acres.
So, consensus is to get this out for legal review?
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to the any residence constructed shall not be converted. You can read the rest.
Hold on. The planning board shall not grant subdivision approval to any subdivision as defined under the aforementioned statute for the purposes of constructing a dwelling.
Subdivision building is what this is addressing. Building subdivisions of houses.
Will not grant subdivision approval to any subdivision as defined under the aforementioned statute for the purposes, so, no,
So a subdivision would be that second split in a 5-year period based
I
on the
see.
definition above. So you don't have to go to planning board for a single split in a 5-year period. Under state law, if you split a second time in 5 years,
that's where it comes in.
that's where
okay.
it becomes a subdivision under that definition.
Thank you.
So, do you mean, where it says approval of any subdivision, do you mean approval of any proposed subdivision?
I think it's intended to prevent a subdivision as defined in state law, which is the second split in a 5-year period. One division is not a subdivision. The second division is clearly defined as a subdivision under state law.
Oh, I see.
A single split does not constitute a
But
subdivision.
it's on, but it's about something that's being proposed as opposed to something that's extant as a subdivision.
Yeah, I mean, you could add proposed
I
if,
think proposed would be good language.
Is that, I mean, is that what we're trying to
Right.
govern here?
Right, we're planning, these things are all planned.
So the language would then be, the planning board shall not grant a proposed subdivision approval?
No, I think what I was saying was shall not grant subdivision
Subdivision
approval to any
proposed
proposed
subdivision.
subdivision.
Okay.
But I don't know if by inserting that, we're actually changing the meaning.
But it's,
I
it
don't
does
think
make
so, but it
sense.
ready better, probably.
Yeah.
It does. Proposed subdivision as defined under the aforesaid statute, so it goes with that.
Everybody follow that?
It's a good suggestion,
Okay.
Peter.
Okay. Good? Move on to the
Good.
next section. Any residence constructed?
No, and nothing herein shall prohibit the approval.
Or one or more, okay, I'm sorry, I thought that was all kind of rolled in.
So the intent of that was to make it clear that if there was 50 acres and there were 5 farming operations not tied to a residential use, right now you could go to the planning board and get subdivision approval and create 5 separate entities
Okay.
doing a permitted agricultural use, and you could still do that as long as it didn't involve a residence.
Right,
Yep.
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we're moving on to any residence now. That's what we're talking about. I know there was one note that,
So this is also, and Chris, the idea of what are the responsibilities of the Ag Advisory Board, and one thing that it states in here is that
Yeah.
that it would be, shall not be converted to non-farm use except by, and this gives permission to the Ag Advisory Board to do that, when actually, I'm proposing that it should be, they make a recommendation.
To the city council or to the
Planning
The
board.
planning board.
I see, yeah.
So use except by permission of the planning board based upon
Recommendation.
recommendations of the Agriculture Advisory.
Advisory Board.
Yeah.
Recommendations. The base might be the wrong word. Eric, legal?
Based
Use
on,
except by permission of the planning board following a recommendation. Because base would mean they have to follow that, or I'd say, following
a recommendation by the Ag Advisory Board.
recommendation, yes. As an after the fact.
So, just gonna throw this out there. Let's say somebody goes through all the hoops and they build a dwelling and they are farming the land. Then they decide they don't want to farm it anymore, but they'll lease their land to somebody else. Can they still live in that dwelling?
I'm not on the Agriculture Advisory Board.
Would that be the Agricultural Advisory Board that would make that suggestion? Because then they could hear.
You gotta ask yourself, who's gonna throw them out of their own house?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why the Ag Board, Advisory Board is there to hear individual petitions or requests.
But isn't that gaming the system?
No, it's farming. Farming's farming, right?
I think it
Yeah.
could be gaming the system unless the abandonment or reduction, the reason that they're not participating actively in the agriculture is from a cause beyond their control.
Where it got here is the fact that we're keeping the land in farm.
Brian,
So
can
if
you
they-
just speak?
I'm sorry. Figured I had a loud enough mouth that they didn't have a, the idea is to keep the land in farming, so it's, you could get old and retire, and your kids come out and farm the land. The land is still being farmed. That's the idea of having the regulations, is that we keep the land farming. So,
Right.
Keep the land farming.
I think somebody could intentionally build the home, then lease the land with no intention to ever be a farmer, but that's where the Ag Commission could
Yeah, listen,
weigh
there's a
in.
lot of examples in the business world of starting and owning a company, but never setting foot in it, nor doing anything but collecting a check. So there's precedence for that. It's a great job if you can get it. I'm still looking, but, so I agree with Brian. There's a lot of things. It could be, hey, you could get in a car accident, you can't walk. You still want to live in your home and someone else is running your farm for you. So,
I think this is an area where we could put in something about the soils and say something like the planning board shall not, based on a farm plan, the planning board shall not approve any dwelling in the ag zone that is sited on soils of statewide significance. Or,
Yeah, that's a good thought, I think. For
what
preserving.
if and
So
and that's a
where
good
would that-
idea, but what if your entire lot is?
again, I think that the planning board of the Auburn Agricultural Committee will have the ultimate recommendation,
Yeah.
but you'd want to try to prohibit them from citing it directly on those soils, right?
How many
Here in
acres
Maine,
does,
if there are very many acres involved, there's going to be more than one kind of soil.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I've looked at these maps, and they are, these areas are not large and generally don't cover an entire property, so.
What you mean, though, by the soils, you want to preserve the soils for farming. You don't want to be
Yeah.
building a house
Yeah.
on pristine property that you could grow anything on, I
Right.
mean, that's what you're getting at, and I think it fits here somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
I would like to see it fit here somewhere.
And was there, in our discussion that we had before, was there not rules from the state that states that?
They have guidelines, I think, but I don't think they have any explicit rules about citing on soils, do they?
No.
I think it's a local, I think it's up to the zoning.
Our local or state rules don't guide that one way or another, right now, currently, for housing sites.
so, Chris, I get that concern. One concern I would have with that is that someone might own a piece of property that is almost exclusively have soils of statewide significance.
Right.
But they want to put a 2,000 square foot house on it and farm the rest of it.
Well, that was why I was saying, I think
So
that we
you
ought
know,
to
if
have
you-
some way of,
If you fly over the breadbasket of the country, you see, you know, thousands of square miles of cropland. You see these tiny little houses in the corner of the lot.
yeah, the goal
They're
isn't
not
to
taking
prohibit them from having farms
Where he
or
comes from.
farmhouses. The goal is siting, right?
Right, no, I think the
it's
objection
citing-
is you don't want to turn a 200-acre tillable soil lot,
Right.
40 McMansions.
Right.
Popping up where
Exactly.
no crop's ever going to grow again,
Right.
Right.
except,
Right.
you know, Kentucky bluegrass in the
Yeah,
lawns.
and I would think that any farmer under this ordinance would do this anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no farmer is
would
gonna
hope.
erect his house
You would hope.
where he can grow his
I think-
potatoes.
You know, you could incorporate that language with an option to appeal to the Farm Advisory Board if there is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that
For
they can't have a
placement.
house, I'm just saying that we'd prefer, if they're citing their house, not to have it on the soils of statewide importance.
So,
Yeah.
again, guidelines, recommendations, advisory. This is go for the later part of the conversation. It would be interesting if, and I'm not even sure if this is doable, it's just an idea, that if upon any new permit or plan submitted to city staff, that gets forwarded up to the Agriculture Advisory Board for a recommendation, looking at maps, overlays on arable land, and saying, you know, dear potential, you know, farmer, we'd like to say that, you know, upon site map review, you know, without an on-site visit, that we recommend that in this quadrant is where you place your home, and this is the reasons why. Yeah, it's good in-your-face guideline. It's, might be a lot of work for the Agriculture Advisory Board.
Sounds like a, yes,
But
it is.
again, is it
But-
worth it, right?
Right.
All the work that we're doing here.
No, actually,
worth
if you have that in place, and the only time that basically it would ever have to go to the Ag Advisory Board was if they appealed for
Right.
Right.
an option.
Right.
And actually, it's a fairly simple process to obtain that information because Soil Conservation Service basically either has it on file or else they can get it very easily, so that it's readily available information, and really it's a very simple process because, you know, as we were talking here, if the only option is to, you know, if there is no option, why they can ask for special permission.
And we have those maps overlaid on our tax maps as well, locally.
Okay, so we talk about, if we, I'm gonna just circle back to 60.2. It's interesting what you said, Maurice. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You're talking about having a farm plan upon your, you know, intended desire to have a farm dwelling, right? As part of that plan, Eric, I'm not an expert on this. If someone wants to build a house anywhere else, do they have to provide a rudimentary site map showing setbacks?
Yes.
Footprint?
Yeah. Plot plan.
Plot plan?
Yep.
Plot plan. Could we have added to that plot plan, the soil overlay done by the applicant?
We could, I think, listening to what Chris was suggesting, I think if you wanted to add a section F to the permitted uses one-family detached dwellings, you could have a section F that said siting of residences should avoid prime soils or soils of statewide significance where alternatives exist on the parcel.
Where are you?
Something along those lines.
I'm sorry, where are you?
So I think we were at the
11019.
Number one. Oh, yeah, we were down here.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's on the one.
And you're looking on the backside?
Yeah, the
Backside,
next-
Page 2.
E ends after the word article. If you wanted to add that condition there, you could add an F,
Yeah.
as in Frank. Siting of residences should avoid the prime soils.
So I think let's do that. And that, you had that language.
Let's see.
Oh, I'm
Everybody,
sorry.
let's see if, I think it's a solid idea. Everybody else agree with that? Giving the
I agree
recommendation
with
about
that.
avoiding arable land and what Eric basically just said, I can't repeat it.
Can you repeat that slowly, please?
Siting of residences should avoid prime soils or soils of statewide significance when alternatives exist on the parcel.
I don't think we have.
So that doesn't exist on the screen.
Scroll down a little bit more, it would be
Right,
down here.
further down.
It would go here as,
There.
F.
this is E, which carries over to the next page, ending here. There would be a section F added.
Prime soils or
Significant alternatives available.
Historical significance and
lands of historical
Okay.
significance.
Yes, good catch. Everybody good with that? That
Yes.
addition, the clarification?
Very good catch.
Yes?
That's a good one. Yes.
Okay. And Chris, that brings up that point you made earlier about soils of statewide significance.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, now we're moving.
Thanks for bringing it up.
I think we covered that. So let's move further down. And we're going to just keep going all the way down to B. Okay, so basically uses, starting with buildings, equipment, machinery, and so forth. Is there any questions, comments, or clarification? Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
All of the original verbiage as well.
Right.
What is we trying to do here with the 3? Forest products raised for harvest? Is that's what we're on, right? That section?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Trees.
So what would be a forest product raised for harvest?
Maurice, you helped with in 1964. There has been no change here, so.
Yeah, I think that language has existed. I would say that is any tree or forest product, and most of them are trees.
Saw logs, firewood, pulpwood.
So you have a right to have it on your land if you
Wooden
cut the tree
utensils.
down.
As a permitted
Money
use,
grows on
you
trees,
can
right?
raise forest products.
basically any product that you can get from them.
Yeah.
It'd be tough to say that you couldn't, because that's what would happen if you didn't do anything with your land. But
Good. Anything up to number 13? Section B then? Special exemption uses?
Yeah.
And basically that whole page too, is there any questions on that verbiage?
Approval by the planning board, would you say the advisory board?
I'm
or-
sorry, where do you see this?
B, the end of the first sentence into the next, following uses permitted approval by the planning board, or are we suggesting the advisory board?
Well, the advisory board wouldn't approve anything. It would make recommendations.
They're gonna be getting this, they'll be getting this stuff first,
All right,
and then it comes to
Yep.
planning.
got it.
So add that same verbiage into B? Approval by the planning board, following,
I just want to make sure everybody understands what you're doing when you change that. Right now, you can go to the planning board and get approval for any of these special exception uses: sawmills, veterinary hospitals, agricultural services and equipment, recreational uses of land like Lost Valley or golf courses. You can do those by going to one public board now. We'd be adding a second step in that process that would
I don't think that's,
Oh, I
add
think we
time and
leave it.
deliberation.
so recommended leaving
Yes.
as is? Okay.
Yes,
Planning board, purvey, done.
Under B, number 4, would that still go to the planning board, or would that go to the agricultural advisory board?
Yeah, the change that was made tonight to the other section
Previous one.
regarding that abandonment would go to the board for a recommendation, the Ag Advisory Board for a recommendation, then to Planning Board, if you wanted to be consistent.
Thoughts? Basically making this consistent with if a normal or primary farm dwelling became non-farm residential, it would first go to the,
Advisory board.
basically, except by permission of the planning board following review by the agriculture advisory board.
Would we say review and a recommendation?
Gotta make it consistent with the language before. Oh, I can't remember what that was. We just had review, but it could be review and recommendation.
You're right about keeping it consistent, though.
Eric, if you could just get legal opinion on making sure, and let's obviously make sure both, and I know the attorney as well, are consistent, but it should be following review and recommendation by the Agriculture Advisory Board. But still, Planning Board is the only permissive body there. Anything else on that page?
No.
Okay. Let's go on to the next page. It's one and the same, of course.
I think the only change that this group had proposed is number 7, rifle, pistol, skeet, trap shooting ranges, public or private, would no longer be permitted. And the ordinance does define that as the private, in this instance, is clearly defined in the definitions as like a membership club. That does not include if somebody wanted to set up a target and have their own personal shooting range, as long as it's not open to the public
business.
or
Members only.
members only kind of thing. You could still have your friends over to sight in your deer rifles at your house in the ag zone.
Is there any limit on that? Like every Sunday afternoon, you could have your friends?
It doesn't get that specific in the cases where we've had a problem with excessive shooting in one spot. We've been able to encourage them to go somewhere else because it was tied to a gun shop or some kind of organized shooting events.
Yeah. Thanks.
You could certainly have a neighbor that shoots more than you would like them to, though,
Yeah.
at the same time.
I'm one of those neighbors.
Several.
You do,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, this is all historical. This is going to be commented heavily on by the state as well for modernization of some of the definitions. I know they already mentioned that, so.
Cemeteries?
Yeah, if we skip,
No, we're at that point
Right,
right now.
cemeteries.
Yeah.
where in the world is this old thing of 20 acres for a cemetery come from?
I don't
That's
know.
from 1964. We didn't, don't look over here, we didn't do that.
Well, if it said no cemeteries any bigger than 20 acres, so a 20-acre cemetery is the size of St. Peter's.
St. Peter's. We might need another one, who knows?
Yeah, but what's it doing in here? What,
Well,
Just put it in there.
Well, cemeteries are allowed in the ag zone.
right.
yeah, but most of them are half an acre.
Yeah, they're real small, right?
Well, your old historic ones.
Yeah, the old ones.
But, I mean, if you had a lot of land and ag, you could actually turn it into a cemetery. It's good money, I heard.
I'm thinking about it, but I don't know what. Dying to get into. I'd have to turn my cemetery into a 20-acre cemetery?
No, at least. That's what
least.
it's saying.
At least 20 acres. Have you got any idea why you'd have such a thing as that?
Dude, this is only my opinion. Based upon what I've read on a lot of this ordinance from 1964, they put permissions in that were just unattainable. So nobody would start it. They allowed 50% income rule. You can farm if 50% of your family's income is derived from agriculture, knowing it was an unattainable criteria. And I think 20 acres is an unattainable criteria. I think they did that to say it's a permissible use, but knowing that no one's going to do it.
Yeah.
Or they just had, I mean, there were larger plots back then, so.
And that might
perhaps-
have been what they wanted to do. Was it prevent sprawl instead of 100 half-acre cemeteries? You
Yeah.
get 140.
Or
Do you remember that, Maurice? I mean, those conversations. It's
You know, basically, they were trying to eliminate, these, maybe have a half dozen, make it easier for the city to maintain, come Memorial Day or that thing. And I don't think the 20 acres was, I think it was a number that was kind of pulled out of the air, but just, excuse me, to try to limit these little small ones from the
Family plots.
standpoint of municipal maintenance.
there are a lot of state laws that regulate municipalities maintaining cemeteries within their boundaries. So, and they exist today.
But there are some economies of scale, too, to have fewer larger cemeteries to mow, for instance, than a bunch of small ones.
No, state law allows you to be buried on your own land. Right?
Yes,
Now, is that a cemetery?
No.
no.
It's not a cemetery.
You have to be
Try-
by
Don't
yourself,
try to do
though.
anything with the land once they know that you're buried there, because you can't. They literally have to dig you up. My father-in-law was buried on his property at Sabatis. They literally had to dig up every piece of earth on his property because they couldn't identify his grave. So they literally went 3 feet down and cleared his entire property.
You find them? Well, it's still a personal question, but I'm
No, they
curious.
didn't find him, but they gave the dirt to my brother-in-law, and it's out in his backyard right now. It's like, don't ask me the logic in it, but it's,
Is he cremated?
Yeah. Maine. Hopefully it was good dirt. Okay.
Wow.
Cemeteries. Okay, let's move on. Again, a lot of this stuff is going to be covered by the state, again. Then we get down to, unless there's anything quick on that after a quick review,
No.
we're down to 60-146, which is dimensional regulations. And again, the red is what we changed. This is starting to get into the 10-acre law, or rule. Section 1. No lot shall be created containing less than 10 acres and measuring less than 250 feet in width at the street frontage.
Eric, can you just move the screen up? Thank you.
Good? Okay, so there we go, section 1. This is what we discussed. The 250-foot street frontage was historically there. And then less than 10 acres.
And
That's-
that was there.
That was
yeah.
there.
And the 200 feet in depth was there.
The second portion of this,
Can we just back up just a little bit?
yeah,
No building shall be erected on a lot containing less than 3 acres. What does that mean?
So that, the board had asked for existing lots that existed as of January 1, 2018, to become buildable potentially. And that was an attempt, if they were over 3 acres, that was an attempt to make those lots buildable if they exist as of January 1 and they exceed 3 acres.
I'm not comfortable with that.
okay. Are you confused? Or are you not comfortable with that
I think
concept?
that's a very
again?
small area, if we're going to be truly thinking about agriculture,
Okay.
forestry, conservation.
Okay, so let's look at the whole concept. Okay, and we'll come back to that. Continue on the next page. I'm going to bring this point up. On the second red line, lots greater than 3 acres in area in existence as of January 1st, 2018 shall not be subject to the minimum width, street frontage, depth, and density requirements. That's in contrast or conflict
It is.
with the sentence previous. So when we discussed this, it was the grandfathering, if you would, of lots between 3 and 10 acres, but they still had to meet the road or the street
Right.
frontage and the depth requirements.
The
They would
250
still have to have the 250
250
feet.
and
That's
the
not the way I
and the
understood it,
200,
so
Yes.
we
yeah.
can
I mean-
change that.
Folks are in agreement in that, in that definition?
Definitely.
That was going to prevent a 50-foot street frontage on a 3 or 4 acre lot,
Right.
in theory.
So the only exception would be that their density would be greater than one per 10 acres.
Yes.
So just strike out minimum width, street frontage, and depth.
Existence as of January 1st, 2018.
Thank you.
I'd scroll a little bit more, just to get ahead of it. There you go. Right there, that's good.
So then, just to recap, we are removing the shall not.
No, we're not. Which, as in, shall not. I'm sorry, you're going to have to be a little bit more descriptive? Oh,
Lots-
that shall not be subject, yes. They shall be subject to the minimum frontage.
So I guess the edit that as I understood it, is we would take out this highlighted text, so it would read, lots greater than 3 acres in area in existence as of January 1, 2018, shall not be subject to the density requirement. And we would get rid of the S on requirements. So that would allow for a house, even though the density would be higher than 1 house per 10 acres.
So so you would not be in conflict with the 250 width and 200 depth rule, correct? That would you'd still have to comply.
Still have to comply with that. I think that's the way I read it if we delete this blue highlighted text.
Subject to.
But less than 10.
Greater than 3, but less than 10 acres in area? So just to ensure that nobody applies it to a larger lot.
Good point.
Those are the street, but that's the same frontage rules for larger lots as well, correct? 250 and 200?
Right, that
So
is.
it's a moot point?
But we would, the way I understand it is we would still want the density requirement of not more than 1 residence per 10 acres to apply to those lots that are currently larger than 10.
Okay.
So it would read lots greater than 3 acres in area, but less than 10 in existence as of the rest of it.
January 1, 2018?
Yep, shall not be subject to the density requirement.
But they'd still be by default subject to your width and your depth.
That's what I mean.
Should there be some sort of a sunset provision on that? I mean, is this a sort of one window of time opportunity
Right.
for these landowners that there were people that came here in a public forum that expressed that frustration and that desire, and I think we were trying to accommodate them with this provision.
Yeah,
People that had
correct me if I'm wrong.
essentially owned land for some period of time that were looking to have a small farmstead.
It was almost like a one-time reset with no sunset. In other words, this was it in order to, to correct some irregularities since 1964. But, this is by no means designed to create, hundreds of 3-acre or 4-acre or 5-acre lots.
So should this say, within 5 years of the enactment of this?
So it only give a 5-year window to take advantage of it?
Right.
We haven't, that's something we haven't talked with or about.
I don't know. I mean,
I guess it probably is.
It seems the city of Auburn, we've done some illegal stuff over the years anyways.
Well, they already own this property.
If you don't
They're
put a
already there.
sunset provision on it, then you're gonna have these 3 to 10 acre lots that could exist for 100 years before somebody decides to take advantage of that provision.
I think the sunset,
Which is in, this is a provision that's in conflict with the rest of the 10 acre minimum lot size, so how long do you want to keep that exception available?
So you've got a window of opportunity, 5-year window, and these are all people who are currently there.
Not necessarily. I understand the sunset. This is just thinking kind of in a roundabout way here. When you put an arbitrary, which it is, right, a sunset, a time frame, 5 years, what you're doing is creating an artificial demand. So you're actually encouraging people to go ahead and take advantage of this 5-year period, in which time they might not have an adequate farm plan. They might not be ready to farm, okay, because they still have to follow that aspect. Okay, it's not just you can just build here and not follow the farm plan and generate revenue or comply with the other requirements.
That's why we had the 2.5 acre agricultural use requirement.
I wouldn't put I wouldn't put a sunset on it, because I do think it just that artificial demand, that limited time forces people to do bad things, in my opinion, right?
Yes.
I mean, again, that's not by an absolute. It's up for conversation. It's a great point, though. In theory, it could be out there wallowing for 100 years.
Right. I think it is.
Any other topics, any discussion on that, on sunset or no
I
sunset?
think that's a good idea. They may not have the, monetary, capability to do anything with that. No, I think leaving it.
Lot owners that have adjoining lots to merge in Auburn?
no.
No, so I could own 3 of these 3-acre lots potentially next to each other. Because I know that in many zoning areas, they do require, if you have abutting properties, they require them to be merged.
so that you don't end up with these
If you-
orphan-zoned things.
If you created a new one that didn't meet the minimum standards, then it would have to be merged, but if you
I
owned
see.
3 existing ones prior to the zoning ordinance, you could keep them
I
separate,
see.
if you chose to.
And we had a number for these, a rough number, I don't know.
82 or 87, if I remember, it was 80-something. But that was just
How were all
3
these
to
created,
10.
Do you remember, Eric? These little 3-acre lots, since it was all zoned 10 acre.
I mean, a lot of them, you'd have to look at each one individually, just like any houses that show up with a construction date. You'd have to look at the situation individually, but most of them were created prior to having zoning.
Okay.
Or they, in the case of a house, if you completely gut rehabbed a house, the age of the house may be functionally, based on the assessment records, brought up to the date of the gut rehab.
But how are these, your question was, how are these 3-acre lots or 8-acre lots created, 3 to 10-acre lots with this ordinance in place? I've talked to a lot of people and say anecdotal that it was just, 100 years ago, I had 4 kids and 100 acres, and they each got 25, and they had kids, and they keep getting split, and then all of a sudden, 1964 happens, and you're under the gun. I don't believe there's any, and I'm not sure on this, if there's any grandfathering allowed to build a farm residence post-1964 on lots less than 10 acres.
No.
Was there any period of time, a sunset, like, okay, we're enacting this ordinance, but you own this 5-acre plot, but you haven't built a home or a farm dwelling yet, you have X amount of years to do so? In all my research on this, I've never seen that.
Was any, you would know, right, Maurice?
I'm not aware of anything like that, that allowed for a short period of time where you could.
The only thing that grandfathered is actually existing dwellings then.
Right.
Okay. So at this point, is there any recommendations, any more thoughts? Do we add a sunset? Do we not add a sunset to this? Do we let it stay there in perpetuity?
Letting it stay there makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let's just keep going on to A and then B. And all this is original language.
In number 4, does that height still, is that still appropriate? I don't know, I'm just,
Accessory buildings may be huge buildings,
the height of
so
all dwellings shall be limited to 2 1/2 stories of 35 feet in height. Maybe that's,
Many of our residential zones use that standard. It's a pretty
Okay.
common standard. But it makes an exception for like silos or barns that need to be higher
it
than
does,
that.
okay.
Up to the 65 feet.
So one of the primary drivers on that is fire rescue apparatus and the ability to reach. Okay. Can you scroll down, please, Eric? Okay. After this? Yeah, we can. So let's go into off-street parking. Height, is there anything, first of all, I'm sorry, is there anything else that, any comments or clarification on the existing ordinance that is still here? That brings us to the end. Let's do this. It's been a couple hours. Let's just take a 5-minute break, or maybe 7. Okay, let's just take a break. Then we'll reconvene here and we'll keep moving on, okay? Thank you.
I know where the cable is. That's one thing I've got that.
It's over there?
It's a well-stocked candy machine.
Excuse me, Kathy. What? After that,
Yeah, we're not gonna vote, basically. There's not ever gonna be a vote, it sounds like. One way or the other. It's gonna be just today's meeting, and then that will be. No, he's not even gonna bother. He made it clear. He's not going to. There's gonna be no vote.
And the other thing that I don't understand, Chris, is when did we vote
We didn't.
and get a 5-3 approval? The only thing that we voted on for that was to that PUD stuff. We added it to that but we hadn't agreed that this was what we were gonna do.
Right, it was to be, it was supposed to be a recommendation of the planning board or something.
This thing here would be added to this here.
Potentially as like a,
But this
they
wasn't
felt-
approved
right,
at
right.
that time.
Well, he's claiming we voted on all
This is what this is saying.
yeah.
Can't say we didn't vote for that.
Well, yeah, we can. Sounds like it's just. I don't think we're gonna vote. That's what the. I know.
Recognition here at all.
It's gonna be exactly what it is here.
Which is a travesty. Absolute travesty.
I fully agree. It ought to get to the planning board. and
Oh, yeah.
Let them do something with it. Maybe we don't, I know there's people that don't respect or like the planning board. That's better than just nothing.
Oh, sure.
But, to say that we're recommending this, study it.
Right.
It's like the old ad hoc committee, Chris, that said you need an advisory council board.
I think the Ag Advisory Committee, the fact that we haven't talked about it is somewhat problematic, because we have no sense of what its
Yeah,
real role is.
that's coming up. Talk about that a long goddamn time. Letter to you people. To you, they're gonna tell
This is
you.
going to,
Go
I guess this
study.
is gonna be, from the council to have us look at. We'll give our recommendations on it and then pass it back to the council. All we're doing is making suggestions to what we think that the ordinance should change to. So we'll say this is a study, send it to the planning boards to see if it meets mustard with the current planning.
You
laws
did?
we have.
We did. Yeah, actually, I have one.
Back and say, oh, yes, it meets all the zoning requirements.
Of course we do.
Do the planning board's
Crossroads,
review.
whole ground,
Like,
whatever you want.
you could come in, grab a hot cup and go.
Oh,
City council
sure.
for them to vote on.
Yeah, it was,
once
that was
we-
on my bucket
I
list,
think
so.
while they send it to us,
Like accomplishment. It was 7 or 8 feet long, so.
part of the, as part of
Nice.
the review,
Eric caught a
It is.
sailfish.
hey, if the state comes back and says,
Wow, look
this
at
part
that.
shouldn't be here, that gives the
What
council,
we're using as bait?
made our
They
decision
were live
based on
fish, as
what we
Live
have
fish, yeah.
under our ordinances, and then the
those
state will
others.
make their recommendation, and the council will have to make a decision. Because the council can change it also.
That was
After
every
we've done all the,
This
whatever
was
we
like
want to.
Auburn, nice.
Was it Lake Auburn?
Yeah.
Right, I was gonna say, hold on a second, sailfish.
Talk about tourism.
Yeah, exactly. They're stocking it.
Just a wrapper, I don't know how it goes.
Brackish water lake now.
Okay.
What's that?
I know my wife's gonna be going, did you have a candy bar? Did you have a soda again?
No.
It's Kathy's, it was Kathy's.
I know.
Elimination day, oh my God.
Oh, really? For allergies?
It's, things that are causing issues, not necessarily allergic to, but things that might be.
So I figured it would time you. But I'll eat some more when I get home.
Everything.
We're gonna wait,
No nightshades, no.
we'll have input at the very end.
It is the end, it's the last one, and then open session.
This makes a good point about us wanting to sort of create this ag committee advisory board, but they've got to sort of self-create.
Which two would they choose?
They do. So what we have to do, and I covered this with Peter and Phil, today, I'll reiterate that. They do have to self-create, okay? The council creates the actual committee itself and the structure, roles, and responsibilities. Bylaws,
Voted.
so at a minimum, right?
Candy away from the.
It's not, you've got forestry. You
Yeah,
voted to do
exactly.
it. Or you devoted.
And she's trying to figure out what she wants to add.
Yes.
I just want to, so we're not sitting here and parsing the whole thing.
It's an extremely low bar.
And, you know, this can happen, you know, very easily.
Just cornmeal.
You can,
Add the consistency of season.
keep this going
she's
as an
doing this.
advisory type group to help formulate this for the council, because council can get out some ways. I think this is a good thing.
Doesn't membership have to go through the,
It absolutely has to go, anything has to go through the application.
maybe there could be one more meeting after this, specifically around the ag.
Yeah, and we can talk about that, I'll talk about getting it out.
She goes, you wanna try it? It's like.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna start off.
Gentleman that comes to the shop on Saturday, on Sunday afternoon. We could ask them 2 to 4, and he does gluten-free, baking.
I think one more
I'm not a
meeting.
fan of it, just because I'm not, first of all, I don't have to eat that way,
In
but
June
his
is
stuff
the
is
last
pretty remarkable. If that's something she can do, it's just.
That's what the protocol is. I'm sorry, it goes to the council. I already said this earlier tonight. Council is only saying, yes, something needs to go or something doesn't. The final letter explaining everything should go to the planning board and then follow it up to the council. I mean, yeah, it's just another stalling tactic for them. So,
Try that along with your decision. Be interesting.
yeah, we ready? Peter? Or? Did you? I don't know, it doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up. Okay, so the next item is basically a discussion of a draft introductory letter to the planning board. This is something that I put on here just to start talking about. Follow-up's gonna have to happen on this. But usually a cover letter for any recommendations, in my opinion, is best practice, should be done, explaining the history and how we got here. It's just like the Crossroads study did, talking about the history, talking about the discussions, number of meetings, who participated, copies of minutes, arguments both pro and con. It should be a introductory level letter that gives initially the planning board and then the city council some background during their deliberation processes, okay? So, with that said, any comments on it? Idea, good, bad, indifferent, no pride of authorship on that idea, but I thought it'd be something important to talk about during this.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it ought to include a summary of the way we've gone about our deliberations, you know, how many times we've met, the topics we've covered, the fact that we've had agreements, disagreements, and reached resolution on a number of things, and then enumerate our resolutions, and, you know, perhaps a little background on each one of those, just so there's context. I think context is really critical when you're trying to make a recommendation to a governing body, so they understand, you know, sort of where we've come, where we started, why we started this in the first place, and what our objectives were, and have we met those objectives, and are the objectives fulfilled in the recommendations we're making?
I think submitting copies of all of the work that's been done so far as well, a master folder, I mean, I would give mine up or something, but I think so that they can look through the original works from way back, because there are different years involved here. So, I mean, I've got all these here, so I think if they had that to refer to, it would be a good idea, if they needed it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I looked at this is that this group came about as a result of a combination of the Crossroads report
Exactly.
and the so-called ad hoc committee on agriculture. And it was really the mayor's desire to continue that and bring it to some specific recommendations,
Right.
set of recommendations where the other two groups had made more broad recommendations, but not specific recommendations to change the ordinance. And this group was really convened to make the specifics in the ordinance come forward. Is that saying that reasonably well?
I think Alfred's suggestion, basically, of background data is good. And I wonder if possibly Eric could prepare 1 or 2 pages that would summarize the factual data. You know, you had a good table on the soils that existed and how many are available today on what zones, whatever, and then you had, you know, the number of structures in the so-called ag zone, and I forget, a series of numbers like that, almost in summary form, but basically a page or 2 or 3, whatever, but basically so that anyone reading the document basically would have those right there to refer to and, form their own judgments and evaluation. But because hard numbers are difficult to come by because they're so scattered many times, and so I think Eric's summary would be very helpful.
That'll also help people reading understand the scope of what we're talking about, how much property actually is under consideration for this.
I'd like to propose, based upon what y'all are saying, there's 3 words that usually I've used in business over the years, my mentors have used and taught me: data, knowledge, and wisdom, okay? What you're talking about with Eric is putting together the data, okay? Then we're talking about putting together the knowledge. I think we can all agree on the knowledge. And knowledge is, based upon this many lots, is how many farms we have. Okay, this is where we stand within the state and agricultural and the region and through the economy. And I think the diversion here that we need to accept and embrace is the wisdom aspect. Those are the recommendations on going forward in order to achieve a goal. And the goal is universally accepted, which is to increase our agricultural industry or economy in Auburn, okay? That's where I think we're gonna have some problems as a group, because we have had problems as a group, agreeing on what that wisdom is, okay? With that, there is a possibility of having 2 groups or 2 recommendations. Let's say one is everything we're talking about. A second is no, nothing, status quo. A dissent, if you would, opinion. We're not the court or anything, nor is a planning board. But there's something to be said, and that could be incorporated into one document. This is the pros and the cons of both. Does that make sense? Again, just kind of free thinking and talking about that concept.
So just to clarify about the dissenting document, we're going to be presenting what we've created with some background on how it came about and also some data to give some context to this.
The wisdom is the recommendations on the go forward, i.e. looking at this document, this is some of the pros of this doc, or the new ordinance, modernization of the ordinance. There's some of the negatives, here's some of the positives.
Right, so maybe the
Okay.
limits of it.
Could be the limits, yeah, it could be the limits, could be, you know,
Concerns that have arisen.
Yeah.
they should be out there, they should be addressed,
I
because
agree.
we can't say we're the end-all, be-all of all knowledge and the subject matter experts of everything.
Right, it would help whoever's looking at it to know where the points of contention are.
Yes, because they might be able to help and look at the charter and look at other laws and precedents in order to solve that. You know, some things might not be solvable. And so, make sense? We in agreement on that? Okay, well, hey, the agreement part is pretty easy. The doing part, it gets a little bit more challenging. Who wants to take first crack at least putting together, I mean, Eric, can you put together kind of a summary or 1 or 2 page summary as Maurice's?
I can summarize the data points fairly easily.
Okay.
It would be helpful, I think, if somebody from the committee took a crack at the wisdom piece of it.
The knowledge aspect, kind of where we've come from too. I mean,
That'd be well.
the
I
background.
mean, we need a motion. If I'm going to write that, I need a very clear motion on what I should write. So,
With regards to data?
no, I have the data. under
Oh, no, I
control.
think we'll just,
I
yeah,
can
leave it at
summarize
data.
all that.
Yeah, I'd rather
As
keep
far
it-
as your recommendations on changes, it would be helpful to have that come from a committee member, as well as any dissenting.
Can I get 2 people from the committee to volunteer to work collaboratively together?
I'll do that.
On knowledge, wisdom? Brian, Peter? I'm going to throw this out to people who have historically been kind of opposed to change. That's Chris, Maurice, Bill, and Kathy. You know, because I don't want your voices not here.
I wouldn't say opposed to change. I think maybe have other ideas.
I'll happily help out.
Good. Okay. Chris, Brian, Peter? Before any document's done, it has to be sent around to the entire group, okay? For at least some feedback. Make sense? Of course, it's not the end of anybody's voices as individuals. We'll all have multiple chances to speak to planning board, to city council, to the public. So, you know, I don't think there's going to be any shortage of that, nor has there been. But this is just going to help put the package together. Okay? Okay.
Do we have a deadline for that, for first draft?
Well, the question, I think, probably coincides with legal review. Eric, how long do you think before everything is kind of reviewed by legal and staff and input before it goes to the state and before it goes to planning?
We can ask for the draft ordinance to be reviewed starting hopefully by the end of this week. I don't know exactly how long it's going to take. And then we could also, if that's the right time to send it to the state, we can send it to the state at the same time in preparation for the planning board.
I'd rather send it to after we get it done through legal, though.
Okay, yeah, but then we can have them review it as quickly as they can, but I don't know their schedule.
A month from now?
I'm just looking at the calendar. March. So from a timing standpoint, if we submit everything to the plan, when does the planning board meet next?
Tomorrow.
Okay, no.
A month after that.
Second Tuesday in March.
Second Tuesday of March? March 12th.
Right.
That's actually March 12th. Okay. And that falls after the vote from the council meeting on February 25th in order to recommend it or not to the planning board. So we have council on the 25th, and then we have planning board on the 11th, and that process will start at planning board. And that's probably when the 90-day clock would start ticking, starting on March 11th. Is everybody clear on that? February 25th?
That's the state review.
Correct. State and planning board review, and conservation committee review. And the initial charge of the committee, okay, we were to bring for comments to both planning board and conservation. We didn't realize there's a state law, none of us did. There's a state law requiring a 90-day review period on their end, though. That had to be obviously added afterwards. So, February 25th, order goes to council to recommend this up, has to pass, obviously, to planning board. And then from there, planning board will see it in their agenda hopefully on March 11th unless they're busy with everything else, their agenda's already packed. 90-day clock starts ticking then.
So you need the letter that Chris, Brian,
No
and I
later
are put
than the
together
11th.
then, like, so you don't need that for the February 25th council?
That's not to accept or approve the ordinance, that's simply to refer it out to planning board for deliberation.
Okay, so it's.
So I don't think it's
a
necessary for that.
3-minute exercise, it's not a whole review of,
Correct. It's not the merits of anything. It's whether or not the planning board should get it
okay,
and should look at it.
yep,
It's a direction.
got it.
And then you said March 11th? Yeah, we should have it by March 11th because the planning board's meeting on March 12th.
So we would need it by the Thursday or Friday before that in order to
For the
put it in
agenda?
packet for the
Okay.
12th.
So that means it has to be done, it has to be sent around for review, comments and thoughts, and then submitted.
No later than probably around the 7th.
So is
6th
that
or
Thursday
7th, yeah.
when the agenda is sent out, right? The 7th? Let's go the 7th. Okay. Okay, good. Let's move on. I'm going to turn this part. The next topic is discussion of roles and responsibilities of future agriculture advisory. We've been calling it a board, so we're just going to stick with that language for right now, board. Board. I'm going to turn this over. This is a city council board, so I think it's well and fitting that the city councilors here, Councilor Fournier and Councilor Lasagna, actually lead that conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to them, have them lead it.
Okay, I'll begin, as we've spoken about what we have for documentation. There were a lot of questions that were raised in terms of how do we check this and how do we check that. So I think that, one of the things that I was hearing from all of you is that who is going to be the gatekeeper, and do we need the gatekeeper in terms of that? But I'll just say I would like to elicit from all of you ideas that you have that the Agricultural Advisory Committee Board should begin. What would be the first step that you would like to see that particular board do as the first function?
I'm sorry, maybe, let me just talk about procedure on that. I talked to the city manager and assistant city manager, just to clarify some little bit of logistics. I could get this slightly wrong. But the bylaws, so the council must form the essence of the committee.
Right.
Structure, size, its charge, its limitations. Then the committee itself, after people apply, after the appointment process sends recommendations, and it's voted on by the council, those individuals will help create the bylaws of that future advisory board, okay? So it is a process, and a lot of it's self-driven by the members, the initial members themselves, but there is a process outlined in charter in order to start a commission or a board.
So I wonder if this group or a subgroup would want to meet one more time to be able to come up with that, the outline of what that organization would be, to then send that to the city council so that they can actually formally create the board. So would this,
I like that
would
idea.
this group as a whole want to meet one more time and come up with that, or a subgroup? Either want to?
Project?
Sure.
I believe I did send out a document to everyone, and Adam Lee did as well, that pretty clearly outlined the formation of the Agricultural Advisory Board.
So could we bring that forward to the larger group, do you think?
It was forwarded to everybody within the group.
But I think we have to come to a consensus about it to then send it to the,
Well, the way that proposed ordinance is written is in direct conflict with everything we've talked about tonight.
I mean, I might certainly be able to take that advice, but the Crossroads report also has information about what should be in an advisory board. So to take those things under consideration before we make a recommendation, and have this group, or again, a subgroup, come together and look at that. And there's some other things, the compliance role, to get some more detail around that. Does that seem reasonable? So to consider those things that have been brought forward and that we've seen, and look at them together as a group, and have one meeting to be able to sort of hash that out and then send it to the city council.
That would be with the, groups that you're looking at, essentially, that would be two good documents to start with, and then, debate from there.
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
I certainly would be, think positively. See.
We consider that document as well, but around what the advisory board could look like.
I'd be willing to participate in that.
Anybody else? How about the whole group?
Whole group, one more
And
meeting.
I think, Erica, it would be important to have you there. Okay. So in terms of setting up a meeting, I don't know the best way to do that. Do we ask to set up a doodle poll? Or
Yeah,
do
I
we
think
try
that
and set-
seems to be
does
the
that
best
seem okay?
practices now, is doodle poll. We're using it, the city's using it in a lot of different functions, and it seems to be, works pretty well. I don't know what you all experience with it, if it's your first time or not.
And do we have a time frame by which we want this to be done? At least the recommendation to the city council?
The way it looks, and again, this is just, if you kind of look at everything sequentially, you can't really have one without the other. So if you can't have the ordinance without having the Ag Advisory Board.
Right.
Because it's referenced throughout, which was by design. So you do have, I mean, we're looking at, you got about 90 days or so to come up with a committee makeup and the requirements and so forth. Thankfully, I think Crossroads really did a significant job in helping with that. I think we can get some good templates. It's not the first time we ever formed a committee or a board or a commission in this city, so we have a good template and understand how to do it. The council will know how to do it because they're going to be they're going to be doing this process with our new Committee on Aging, which we're going to start seeing workshops on and ordinances and so forth moving forward in bylaws. So that's going to be kind of the precursor to this, so that it won't be new for the council. Bottom line, you got about 90 days.
Okay, and do we want to workshop it,
As a council or as this group?
council?
Yeah, probably in about 90 days or so, yeah.
Okay.
So you, I mean,
So
that's kind of
probably
your
within the
window of
next
time.
month, we should have a meeting?
Yes.
Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Well, we've got momentum. We know
I agree.
what we've done wrong so far, so we can fix it
Okay.
better.
So can we ask Jody to do that for us?
Yeah, I'll ask Jody to do 2 weeks, to look for something within 2 weeks. That way, to Bill's point, y'all
Yeah.
got some momentum.
Right,
Okay.
right, you can't go beyond that.
Okay, 2 weeks, Jody, invite. Okay.
And does it seem reasonable to have a 2-hour meeting to at least sketch this out?
I think it'll take at
Because we've
least
got
that.
some good material to work with. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, handle that. Is there any other comment or question on that? No? Okay, we're going to move it along. Open session, public comment. We need, I'd love to have, yeah, so if we, Erica, or Chris, could you grab that chair over there? Or, okay. Anybody from the public like to speak? Please come, state your name and address, and if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes, that'd be great.
Barbara Keene, North River Road. I was a little, well, more than a little disappointed that following a vote 5-3 at the last meeting to review, this is the words, I just reviewed what was up for the tape of the last meeting today, that you review what Kathy sent around as alternative language, as an alternative to this language, referring to the 110 document. That passed 5-3. Yet that seemed to be the last substantive vote of that, or of that meeting. Yet there's no, I didn't see or hear any discussion of that, any review of that. So that's, I find very disappointing. It seems like, well, it was voted, it was last meeting, we are just going to keep going. So, very disappointed. particularly disappointed in hearing one of our elected officials essentially insult 3 members of the committee. And I want to thank Councilor Lasagna for sticking up for them. I've heard differences of opinion, but I have heard from everybody different ideas about what change is best. So as a voter, I found that very disappointing, and a lifelong resident of Auburn.
Anybody else?
Dan Herrick, Dearmar Farms, 470 Hatch Road. I'm a little confused here. I made a comment that this has to go to council before it goes to planning board. I think there's a lot more importance you people are putting into the planning board than what there really is. They're no more than just a recommendation board. The council has the power to change anything that needs to be changed in these ordinances or the zoning. This has to be presented, as the ad hoc committee did, to the council. Council has to either have a unanimous vote to bring it to, or present it to the planning board, okay, for their ideas or whatever have you. Or at least 2 councilors have to sign a petition to bring it forward to the planning board, or there's a cost to somebody somewheres. My main concern about this whole thing that's went on here tonight, and it wasn't even brought up or mentioned, is the tax base. You can split land, you can do this, and you can do that. If you have enough acreage, and yes, you can build 1 home on that acreage before you go to the planning board for approval. But if you have a house lot that you can live on it yourself, break off enough for another house lot, that's what your value is. You now have 2 house lots. And people, even when I was a counselor, when we were dealing with an upset tax on a reval, people were coming to us and they were saying, well, the people in the ag zone don't pay as much as we do. They should get hit and pay the same amount that I pay. Well, believe it or not, everybody in the ag zone that has a residence pays the same value that of their house and the land it sets on as everybody else, rural residential, country residential, what have you. It's all the same tax base. What the difference is the outstanding land. The outstanding land is valued with the Patriot system that the city of Auburn uses. That confers to the sellable product that is being sold or has been sold, past or present. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here on this changing of the ag zone, or ordinance, as some people will call it. We all pay the same. There's no difference. Before this goes anywheres, I would like to have Stephanie Gilbert come in, talk to this group, talk with the council and the public before this goes anywhere else, so that everybody has a better understanding on what all you people want to come up with, what all you people's ideas are, and have the public have comment and ask her questions that we can have a better understanding on where we want this all to go. Because as I see it tonight, this is a very, very, very unfair system to us farmers. And then the 90-day window lands right in the dead, nuts of us farmers going full bore 17, 16, 18 hours a day. We ain't got time to come back here. You ain't gonna see us farmers here. So that's a perfect opportunity, like the school board plays their games, to have votes done in the middle of the summer because everybody's on vacation and get what they want. This is the same thing. I can see it happening. You ain't gonna get the real people here that's gonna make the decisions and have the ideas, because it's gonna land right dead in the middle of us farming industry. But I think it better go to council first. I'd appreciate it if it would, and I think it's gonna go a lot smoother if it does, and have public comment that way before it goes to the planning board.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak during open session?
Mike Pelletier, Pownell Road. I just have a question about, I was talking with somebody else about the 250 in ag zone road frontage. Now, does that, I know you guys just changed it, but.
Well, nothing's been changed yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like on my situation, where I am is ag zone after 450 feet off the road, okay? But my road frontage is not ag zone. But that's where my driveway is going through to the, well, the barn.
You have a split lot? A split lot?
Yeah.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
back lot is
Yeah.
ag, the
No,
front
it's-
lot?
Yes, it's not a,
Low
well, yeah,
country.
okay, it's one lot, but I mean, it's a split.
I've
yeah.
got one of those too.
Okay.
But, yeah,
Okay,
it's a little
that's what-
confusing.
I just don't know where this is gonna go. I mean, because I've been coming to these meetings and it's not, if this is the way it's gonna go, I mean, it's gonna really,
I'm gonna just defer out to Eric Cousins on that. I mean, again, the initial, I don't really want to get into the answer, but one question to help clarify, you have land, but you
Yes.
don't have a house on that land right now.
yes, I do.
You do have a dwelling.
I do.
Okay.
I brought it up before, 8 years ago. I got a permit, and I was told they'd give me a permit for a barn, so that's what I did.
Yeah, I remember this story.
Is I built, I've already built, and then now, 8 years later, I've got a log home that I can't do nothing with. I know it's hard on you guys, and.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can actually get an answer specific zoning questions
Okay,
without any
but I
arguments.
just don't know, I mean, about this.
I think it's a good scenario that, something we can apply to what we've already done to see if there's a
Okay.
hole, you know, and.
Is the question, though, whether or not the frontage in the road frontage you have in the lot that's in a different zoning district qualify you to meet the standard for the home you have in the back part of the lot? So if you,
I'm not-
well, if there's a 250-foot road frontage requirement
Yeah.
and you, in the ag zone, but you have, let's say, 400 feet in a low-density country residential zone, do you automatically meet the road frontage requirement?
All of my road frontage is regular. I've got back land that's 450 feet back. I've got 14 acres back there, whatever, and that's what I'm up against right now. And so, I mean, my intentions were 250.
Oh, you're talking 250, okay, going in.
Yes.
Past your land into.
No,
excuse me.
250 road frontage all the way out through.
I don't think that, this committee is definitely not able or to answer any questions on
No, okay,
specifics.
well, I was just, didn't
But
know.
yes, we understand your concern, okay? You have a problem, and I
Okay.
hope it does get addressed.
Okay,
Somehow, some way, and put that to resolution for you.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak during open session?
My name is Shelley Khrushchevsky. I'm a resident of Auburn. And I just was wondering about whether it might be possible for the Ag Advisory Board to review the recommendations that you all have made. I definitely understand that changes, and revisions, refinements need to be made. I'm just wondering if, and I'm definitely not advocating for a snail's pace, but just maybe not a sprint. So that's just an idea of maybe sending these recommendations to the advisory board to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak during open session?
Hello, Evan Sear, 435 West Auburn Road. I'm also on the planning board, chairman, and it's open session, but I'm going to actually ask on behalf of the planning board, and I think it will help the community that when you guys put together your referencing material, I think it would be best to, I was listening at the house, it sounds like there's sort of an impetus to maybe create a narrative. And while I understand that, and it's important, I think it's important that you don't sort of forfeit your authority in the situation by giving everyone the backstory and therefore authority to question your backstory. I think what would be most helpful for the community, for all of us, but also the folks that are going to see this going forward, is that for each change that you make, you defend that change based on the specific goal that you were trying to attain, and how you feel that change meets that goal. I think that would be helpful for us on the planning board, but I also think that that would be helpful for people in the community as they're going through the amendments that you're making to understand what was the specific purpose of making that change or amendment and the intent of doing so. Other than that, I think you guys are doing some really hard work. The agricultural zone is a tough one to deal with. But I thought I'd take my 2-3 minutes to put in a request as you guys move forward.
Well, considering you're the chair of the board that's going to read that, no, that's really appreciative. And anytime, please send us an email if you have any further ideas on what would make it easier for you to review the docs and to conduct your work.
Absolutely.
Whatever that work is.
Thank you guys very much.
Okay. Thanks for driving all the way back from home. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to speak? None being? Okay. We'll close this open session. Close this open session. We're going to move to adjournment. But before we do that, we obviously have some email work and some work that can go back and forth electronically. We have one new meeting coming up. If there's any time that we need to get together and discuss any legal reviews, anything like that, we're not by any means killing this committee, just kind of putting it on hiatus. Let's wait till we start getting some recommendations and some letters back before we meet again on those topics. So, with that said, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Mr. Moore, a second from Councilor Forney. All those in favor of adjourning? Opposed? Abstain? We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, folks. Did you turn it off?